Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host. Do y'all mean a revolution? We got a World War III alert. But first, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe. Let everybody know Co-Figure is live. We got nighttime revolutionary classes. The Middle East is on fire. Salute, family. Let's talk about the Middle East nightmare for Israel, NATO, and the U.S. They can only lie for so long. The whole world knows Israel and the U.S. was humiliated last night.
Viral videos on the internet show how all Iranian missiles hit their designated targets in the occupied Palestinian territories at the Nevatim Air Base in southern Israel, which Iran said was the time to give a firm response to the Zionist regime's aggression. The attack on the night of October 1, 2024, about 25 to 40 hypersonic missiles managed to evade Israeli anti-missile shield, and the U.S. Navy ship failed to intercept the missiles, which hit the military base directly. It is known that Nevatim Air Base, which is located 15 kilometers from the Negev Desert, is an airbase that houses a squadron of fighter jets such as the F-35, and used to be a place where Israel received American bombs in the aggression on Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. Now, the air base is being destroyed to the maximum by order of the Supreme Commander of the Iranian Armed Forces, Ayatollah Khamenei.
We knew this last night. See, we knew last night when I ran my live that the base had been destroyed, the missiles had landed. Mainstream media was lying. You see, we can't believe nothing they say. They are all about propaganda. Most of the missiles intercepted like hell they were. No damage was no damage. No damage had been done. Liar. Country on fire.
Chief of General Staff of the IRGC Armed Forces, Major General Mohammad Bakari, asserted that in this Operation True Promise 2, Iran targeted the Mossad base in Tel Aviv, the Nevatim Air Base, the Hatzerim base which houses the F-35 and F-15 used in the assassination of Sayed Hassan Nasrallah, the IDF radar arrays, and the staging area for Israeli tanks. Initial damage assessments reported that the Nevatim Air Base as well as Israel's so-called Air Force One were badly damaged by the unhindered missile strikes, making them now
not only did this happen, all right, they got totally humiliated. Then Hezbollah kicked their butt this morning. We're going to get in that. I mean, whoop their ass. I said this the other day. They should not invade Lebanon. I said there'll be a mistake. When you can just sit back and assassinate people, but the supreme leaders say that's over with. We're going to attack you for trying to do that. But the mainstream news don't want to say what happened to Israel today. And I'm not talking about the missiles. I'm talking about Hezbollah showed them they not Hamas and killed a bunch of them and ran the rest up out of Lebanon, man. We got them videos, bro.
Operable. Open sources said that around 20 F-35 fifth-generation fighter jets, which bombed the Gaza Strip in Lebanon, with over 85,000 tons of explosives last year, have been disabled there.
And paid for, brother. That's why Israel is so important. They done bought our leaders.
Iran finally broke its long silence and launched a large-scale missile attack. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard said the attack was in retaliation for the assassination of Hamas political director Haniyeh, Hezbollah supreme leader Nasrallah, and Revolutionary Guard Brigadier General Abbas Nurfashan. If the aggressor responds with a counterattack, we will target all its infrastructure. retaliating 1,000 times over.
Come on, man.
Mohammed Bakari warned.
We believe you. We believe you now.
Currently,
I believe him now, y'all. He said if they do anything, we're gonna really go hard. I believe you, Iran. You made a lie out of me.
and extensive flights of dozens of Iranian warplanes are being carried out across the country, on alert to detect and neutralize possible attacks by Zionist fighter jets.
All the humiliation, man. It's enough to go around. It's enough humiliation to go around, y'all, for France and Britain and Germany. But the U.S. is a paper tiger, man. I'm so ashamed of the U.S. Go home if you ain't gonna get it on with Iran. Why are you sitting around there threatening people? Go home. Come on back to America, man. If you ain't gonna go invade Iran, go invade America. Go invade Iran, man. Get over with, man. Yeah, you're scared, ain't you? All right, let's get back to exactly. Let's take a little look. What happened at that air base? I'm hearing a bunch of F-35s was blown up. Ooh, that shit cost a lot of money. 20 F-35s? Okay. Yeah, Iran, they just showed their big dog again, man. I thought they were scared of Israel the other day, man. They made a lie out of me. Yes, Israel got their butt kicked today, boy.
World military experts from major think tanks are still in a state of shock due to yesterday's massive Iranian missile attack on Israel.
I'll show them videos too.
According to them, yesterday's massive Iranian missile strike on Israel was the most powerful attack on the Jewish state in the entire history of the existence of these two ancient peoples. Analyzing yesterday's events, almost all reputable experts and analysts recognized that what is happening now in the Middle East could provoke the outbreak of another global war.
Bad news for NATO.
My friends, as you know, on the night of October 1st, Iran launched a massive missile attack on Israel. Despite the active work of the Israeli air defense, independent monitoring services recorded dozens of explosions throughout Israel. It is reported that during this attack, Iran used more than 500 ballistic missiles of various capacities. At the same time, the Israeli site continues to assure that Iran used only 180 missiles, most of which were allegedly shot down by Israeli.
This boosted the spirit of the revolutionaries, brother, when they did that. Let us know revolution is absolutely a way of life, man. You can't be a big revolutionary like Iran and not do what they did. You see what I'm saying? So they done put a revolution back on the front line again. And they let Putin know, man, he ain't in this thing by himself. Putin was very pleased, man, with that move.
Israeli air defense
China,
systems.
they love that.
Later, representatives of the Pentagon and British intelligence said that Iran allegedly used 200 ballistic missiles of various capacities during the attack on Israel. Whatever it was, this missile strike was indeed the most powerful attack on Israel in history. At the same time, it is worth noting that official Washington and London stated that the West had managed to significantly strengthen Israel's air defense, as a result of which Jerusalem allegedly managed to avoid significant losses from Iranian ballistic missiles.
See, this is how they fooled everybody. They telling everybody, see, Iran didn't kill us. We still alive. You failed. Iran wasn't trying to kill you. They was destroying your warplanes, destroying your air bases. They was bombing the Mossad headquarters. They absolutely succeeded. Iran did what they wanted to do, and the U.S. couldn't stop them. They didn't want to kill a bunch of people, or they absolutely could have did that. They didn't want to. And that's the more humiliating part, because it go to show you, damn, Israel, you supposed to be targeting stuff and hitting it without killing all those innocent people. You just want to mass murder people. So Iran is giving them a double dose of humiliation. Hezbollah giving them a double dose of humiliation. They're targeting the Israeli military. Come on, man. This is what war really supposed to look like, not a bunch of dead civilians. And
it is
sitting there thinking, Israel, they built up these tanks on the border of Gaza and Lebanon. I was thinking to myself, why the hell isn't Iran targeting those buildups of troops? They did. They absolutely targeted the military buildup on the borders of Gaza and Lebanon. They don't want to talk about that.
Reliably known that during this missile attack, Iran used Fateh ballistic missiles, capable of reaching hypersonic speeds of 16,000 kilometers per hour. Commenting on the use of such powerful ballistic missiles against Israel, official Tehran said that it was revenge for the treacherous murder of Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, the third Secretary General of Lebanon's Hezbollah Hassan Nasrallah, and commander of the Quds Force of the Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, Brigadier General Abbas Nilforshan. Moreover, Tehran officially
that Iranian, our powerful Iranian general, he died with Nasrallah. That's how I knew Iran knew Nasrallah was dead, because they knew their own general was dead. You see, it's all Iran keep their leaders near the revolutionaries. You see what I'm saying? It's always a general in Syria. It's always an Iranian general in Iraq. You see what I'm saying? They wherever it's Iranian generals in Yemen. You feel me? Wherever the revolutionaries is at. See, I like that. Iran got their generals there making sure this business get took care of, and they lose their revolutionaries, but they showing the world now, nigga, they ready to fight.
Officially stated that this missile attack on Israel was only a small demonstration of force, and that if Israel decides to respond to this strike, then the Jewish state will literally be wiped off the face of the earth. In particular, the general of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Ismail Qasseri, bluntly stated that Israel should think 1,000 times before deciding on a retaliatory strike against Iran. If the Israeli regime really has no head and decides to strike Iran, then we will have to use other missiles, the power of which will shock the whole world, General Ismail Qasseri said. Which more powerful missiles the Iranian general was talking about remains a mystery. Against this backdrop, many independent experts have suggested that Iran already has tactical nuclear warheads, capable of wiping Israel off the face of the earth. Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, also added oil to the fire. In particular, he officially stated that Iran has accumulated enough highly enriched uranium to refuel several warheads for its ballistic missiles. Moreover, experts noticed that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, while in a bomb shelter, was noticeably nervous, threatening Iran with retaliatory actions. The footage clearly shows how the Israeli Prime Minister's hands are even shaking. All this indicates that Israel and its main ally, the United States, do not have full knowledge of the presence or absence of nuclear weapons in Iran. In addition, yesterday's missile attack on Israel showed the world that Israeli air defense forces are not capable of stopping Iranian missiles. This indicates that if Iran does have nuclear warheads, Israel could not shoot them down. Even though Israel carefully hides the damage from the Iranian missile attack, numerous footage of explosions at Israeli military facilities, including air bases, continues to appear on the network. Moreover, the influential news agency Shafagna, citing its own sources in the Iranian military department, stated that during yesterday's missile attack, 20 units of 5th-generation F-35 fighter jets were destroyed, which were stationed at Israeli Air Force bases in northern and western Israel. Against this backdrop, insiders in Washington began to declare that the United States had started to create a coalition to conduct a military operation against Iran, to protect Israel. It is reported that Washington is very alarmed by the fact that Iran does possess nuclear weapons. Sources in Washington claim that the Pentagon has already begun to develop a plan for a lightning preemptive strike against Iran. It is reported that this preemptive strike on Iran's military facilities should completely disable all the country's launchers, and prevent Tehran from using its ballistic missiles in time.
Impossible.
The fact that Benjamin Netanyahu's hands were shaking indicates that he is not sure about the outcome of a future war with Iran, and is really afraid of a direct conflict with Tehran. The fact that Israel has not yet responded to Iran's missile attack and continues to bomb Beirut and not Tehran indicates that everything did not go according to Benjamin Netanyahu's plan. Yesterday's massive Iranian missile attack on Israel showed that Tel Aviv is currently not ready for a full-scale war with Tehran. In this regard, it can be stated that very soon all Western air defense systems and other types of NATO weapons will be sent not to Ukraine, but to Israel. The fact is that before launching full-scale military operations against Iran, the United States must significantly strengthen not only Israel's air defense, but also the Israeli army units. In this regard, Washington will be forced to refuse further military and financial assistance to Ukraine, as a result of which the regime, led by Vladimir Zelensky, will capitulate within 2 to 3 weeks.
It don't matter. They got to pick a war right now. Because Russia is absolutely took the gloves off and humiliating them Nazis over there. So they got to pick a war. They want to save their NATO project and watch the humiliation of Israel, or do they want to save Israel and NATO collapse in Ukraine? But it's definitely humiliation for them, whichever one they choose. And they will be defeated on whichever. They're not going to win in the Middle East, and they're definitely not winning against Russia.
As cynical as it may sound, the upcoming major war in the Middle East is very beneficial to the United States. Firstly, this war will help Washington justify its loss in Ukraine and save its face. Now, official Washington can claim that the United States left Ukraine in order to help Israel. Secondly, the military operation against Iran will allow the United States to ensure the security of the Strait of Hormuz and solve the problem with Yemen's Houthis, who are still attacking Western military and merchant ships in the Red Sea. However, Washington will be able to achieve all this only if the Western coalition led by the United States can win a landslide victory in the war with Iran. And given the fact that Iran has such allies as Russia and China, many experts doubt that the United States and Israel will be able to defeat Tehran.
Man, they couldn't beat the Taliban. How the fuck they gonna beat Iran? Just think about that. The Taliban don't have missiles, don't have tanks, don't have planes, and they defeated NATO and the U.S. How is the U.S. gonna defeat Iran? That don't even make sense, but that's what they facing. Now we need to take a look at my boy, the professor. He redeemed himself. You see that? They happy over there in Iran, man. They got some get back. Hold on, let me put this on the screen for y'all. Then the professor. I remember the day, professor. Oh, he was sad, man. I felt bad for him. This rider was killed. Everybody, all the revolutionaries, we was lost. We didn't know which way to go. You know, I didn't want to hear nothing he had to say. But today is a new day. Look at that smile on his face. But everybody talking about this interview because he finna. They should have cut this interview off. I don't know why they should have erased it, but he finna wipe the floor with this clown right now.
Well, Professor Mohammed Morandi from the University of Tehran joins us now. Thank you very much for being with us, Professor. I just wonder, first of all, what has Iran achieved by this attack on Israel? Very few of the missiles got through. It, in effect, failed. Many people are calling it a humiliation for Iran.
I think that's a lot of wishful thinking on behalf of you and your colleagues at Sky News. It was a massive blow to the Israeli regime. And the history of this conflict doesn't go back to last year. It is 76 years of ethno-supremacism, ethnic cleansing, and this is a racist regime that you support. What the problem is that you cannot recognize that the difference between you and us is that you support racism and racial hierarchy, and we reject it. And the Israeli regime, if they dare strike back at Iran, we will hit them much harder next time. We will beat them into submission.
Well, but they will strike back, won't they? No sovereign country can put up with having 180 ballistic missiles fired at them. So they will hit back. They will hit hard.
No sovereign country could put up with it. See, they want to see the humiliation of the Muslims and the Arabs. They so pissed that they are being humiliated. No sovereign country can put up with missiles being fired at them. Well, why the hell does Gaza have to put up with it? Why do you expect Lebanon to put up with it? Why did you think Syria has to put up with it? Why do you think that Iran has to put up with you assassinating people in this country? No. It's those countries who not going to put up with Israel shit anymore.
And they could well hit your nuclear facilities, your oil production installations.
And Iran can hit the
they could cause Iran serious damage.
Listen, instead of the rhetoric, be real, because you're misleading your own people. Iran has countless underground missile sites with hundreds of thousands of missiles across the country. They were made after the US invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan to deal with a potential war with the United States. So this puny regime, it is not a state, it is a colony.
Puny regime.
It is a racist, ethno-supremacist colony, which the people call themselves the chosen people. Unlike you, we do not believe in chosen people. And the Palestinian people on that land who've been displaced and pushed into Gaza and who've been slaughtered regularly over 76 years, we will not stand for that. All people in the whole of Palestine must be equal. The Israeli regime, if they strike Iran, we will hit them much harder next time. And they can pretend that they got away, but we hit them very hard last night. We hit their bases. And unlike the Israeli regime, which constantly carries out slaughter and genocide and is carrying out a Holocaust in Gaza, we struck their military targets because unlike you, we actually care about human rights. Not you.
Sky News, they just wanted some views, man. The interview going crazy. They doing good numbers. They say, fuck it, man. Just let the humiliation get us paid. CNN would never post this. They ain't holding no interviews like this in America. They ain't let Professor Miranda talk. They don't want to let him on MSNBC because they don't want to get the foe mopped with them. That's why they don't want to let people who disagree with them on their goddamn channels. Because they don't want they people to hear their business.
Professor, let me just say that we're on the verge of an all-out war, or certainly a war between Israel and Iran. It could be a war that Iran loses. If Iran does lose that war, do you think that the current Iranian regime could survive a defeat? Because that is if what you say is right and Iran is going to hit back even harder, that could be where this all ends up.
Iran will not hit back harder. Iran will hit back much harder. The head of the Iranian forces says Iran will target and destroy all of the Israeli regime's infrastructure. This was the tip of the iceberg. Iran will lose no war. The Israeli regime will. It is time for you and others to end your racism and to end your support for the superior race and to accept that all people in Palestine have equal rights and the Palestinian people have a right of return. Jews, Christians, and Muslims are equal. Unlike what you say, they are equal, and we will accept nothing less than that. The regime must go, and all people must be treated equally. Right. And if the only thing, there's no doubt that Israel will lose, but the only variable here is the United States. If the United States gets involved, have no doubt, the U.S. will be swept out of Iraq by the Iraqi resistance, and all its assets in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. All those regimes that U.S. bases will be destroyed, and the oil and gas markets will cause a situation where the global economy collapse and millions of people will be on the move. So be careful about making stupid mistakes, and the West should stop with its arrogance and get real for once.
Check that phone.
Okay, Professor, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
That's crazy, man. That's crazy. Don't even come to work for a week. That man need about a week off to get himself together. Well, Professor, enjoy your boy. You'll do anything for views, won't you? Even look like a goddamn clown. Now, the humiliation for Israel just didn't stop with the Iron Dome not working, Patriot system not working. Mainstream media don't want to report this, but I got the video right here. I'm reporting it. Some of our other, some other information we'll be watching. They might report on this a little bit too. In the first battle between Israeli soldiers and Lebanon and Hezbollah, the first battle, we're not talking about missiles back and forth. We're talking about soldier to soldier on the ground. Israel was humiliated today. I mean, humiliated. I can guarantee you the Israeli soldiers do not want to fight Hezbollah. And this is what everybody was waiting for. The mano a mano. This is the Israelis getting carried off on stretchers.
The first images of several Israeli helicopters flying near the southern Lebanese border have emerged with the aim of evacuating soldiers who were killed in an ambush in Maroun al-Ras, according to local sources on October 2, 2024. Maroun al-Ras is one of the highest points, hills, and endless fortifications in the area, where a second battle is currently underway after in 2006, Israel failed to capture the city after fighting there for weeks against Ridwan Hezbollah forces. Lebanese fighters reported a successful ambush and heavy losses on the Zionist side. Beirut confirmed that Israeli forces crossed the blue line of demarcation, where the UNIFIL peacekeeping force was previously stationed.
See, they got full of themselves. They was feeling themselves. They really feeling themselves. They've been trying to bully Hamas, and Hamas been doing great, giving them all they can give them, not surrendering. But Hezbollah is a different fighting force. Great guerrilla fighters, probably some of the best on the planet. Soldier to soldier, Israel don't stand a chance.
More than 10 Israeli soldiers were killed in clashes in southern Lebanon, and 60 others were...
Let's stop right there. Israel is admitting to 8 soldiers. I seen that on Al Jazeera. Israel is admitting to 8 soldiers. Now, anybody who pay attention to the Israelis, if they tell you 8 soldiers got killed, that means 30 or 40. That's serious business. If they tell you 8, then about 30 or 40 was killed. If they say 60 injured, then you're probably looking at about 200 or 160 injured. They always lower the numbers. So if they're admitting in the first clashes with Hezbollah, do you know how many? The video right here say 10, but I seen Israel say 8. So just think 8 soldiers in one battle. Do you know what a high body count that is for one little battle? Come on, bro. Hezbollah been waiting to fight these people, bro.
Were injured, Sky News Arabia reported. Views from the east of Maroun al-Ras show medical helicopters buzzing and continuing to arrive. Israeli evacuations are underway where many casualties are reported in the fighting that has not yet ended, as clashes are still ongoing according to the Israeli side. In addition, the Israeli army announced at least 8 Israeli soldiers.
Come on, man. You don't want to fight Iran, bro. This is the little brother. You don't want to fight the Iranians, man. They train Hezbollah. Israel, you want to bring the U.S. down. But it's going to be a lot of this in the Middle East if they continue with this foolishness.
Soldiers killed and 35 others wounded in a Hezbollah ambush in the southern Lebanese village of Adizid, according to media reports. Some images show confirmation of the death toll from the IDF's 89th Brigade Eagles unit. Etan Oster, the command captain, and Nazir Etkin, the team commander, were also liquidated, who specialized in anti-guerrilla warfare, special reconnaissance, and direct attempts to enter Maroun al-Ras. About a day earlier, the commander of the Eagles unit announced that they would carry out larger maneuvers in Lebanon, in the so-called Northern Arrows operation against Hezbollah, and seek to return the northern settlers safely to their homes.
They ain't going home.
The Israeli army showed scenes of their invasion as they entered Lebanese territory with the participation of commandos, which they said.
Yeah, they left.
However, it seems that so far they have suffered heavy losses when trying to advance on the Maroun El Ras line and may be forced to retreat.
Come on, man. Come on, man. Come on, man. Them people, I hope they got good medical insurance, man. Them people waiting on them. Them people waiting to ambush them people, man. What a joke. They don't want to show that on the news. Yeah, we showing on Cut Figure TV news. Hold on, you know. Because it was a sad day for the revolutionaries when Israel died. But the revolutionaries is fighting back and kicking Israel ass. That's what's really going on right now.
Is going to respond tenfold, 100.
Hold on, George.
The answer to the question after Nasrallah, what next, has been already delivered. The big question now is, after Iran's spectacular over Tel Aviv and other Air Force bases elsewhere, what comes next? Will Israel attack Iran? And if so, Iran is going to respond tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold, depending on which Iranian spokesman you listen to. For the Palestinians in Gaza, it is business as usual. Carnage in the orphanage as scores of little children are slaughtered by Israel because they're so mad at having failed to stop the Iranian fireworks display. And in the Lebanon, it's very heavy work indeed. The Israelis have sent raiding parties of commandos across the border, but they're not doing well. And many of them are already going home in boxes. And the Ukrainian front continues to tumble, actually. And the Russian forces could be in Kiev by the end of the year. You think I'm exaggerating? Wait till you hear Colonel Douglas McGregor. And is it the last waltz for Kamala Harris's doomed presidential campaign? Looks that way to me. I'm predicting that Jill Stein will beat Kamala Harris in the state of Michigan. Mark that up on your board. It's the mother of all talk shows, and we're here for the next 2 hours. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
As most of you in our poll this evening think that he intends to do, then Iran is going to respond somewhere between 10 and 1,000 times stronger than they did last night, depending on which Iranian spokesman you are listening to. But even at the lower order, 10 times last night, in a way which is intended to damage the civilian infrastructure, in a way which is determined to make a strategic difference to the state of Israeli defenses, troop concentrations, for example, there'll be a very large number of casualties. And then, if Israel responds again, it's almost certain that we'll be in all-out war in the Middle East. It's a moot point whether we're in all-out war right now. After all, the Palestinians are being slaughtered in huge numbers. The Lebanese civilians are being slaughtered in huge numbers. And just like in Gaza, in Lebanon, 70...
You know what I thought about too? What if all of those soldiers that died, they're saying died fighting Hezbollah, what if those soldiers really died under the bombardment of the missiles last night, and they don't want to say, Iran killed a bunch of Israeli soldiers and injured a bunch because they're saying nothing happened. So they would rather say, oh, no, these people died over here fighting in this war zone that we have in this location. You know, I haven't heard anybody say that, but I really want to look into that because Iran might have killed a bunch of them soldiers last night, and they're lying, saying no, they died fighting somewhere else.
20% of the casualties so far have been women and children. But Hezbollah is turning out to be more than a match for the Israeli invaders, too. One who thought that the cold-blooded murder of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, would lead to a collapse in morale or a collapse in fighting force on the part of the movement that he built over 32 years and designed and created effectively. Anyone who thought that there would be a collapse of morale, collapse in ability of their fighting forces now knows differently. Somewhere between 8 and 80 Israeli soldiers have been killed today in the first field, the first forest of the south of Lebanon. And almost all of them are young men. They're not quite the 18 of the famous Vietnam era song, but they're no more than 22 or 23, and that includes the officers. A captain, a 23-year-old captain, was one of the first to fall. So the flower of Israeli manhood is now lying dead in the first field, in the first forest of the south of Lebanon. And the ability of the Israeli armed forces to properly penetrate the south of and conquer it and make any, can already say on day one is virtually. The truth is, Israel can only bomb people. Israel can only kill women and children. When it comes to man-to-man fighting on the territory of the country that they are invading, they are a complete fail. And I predicted this before it happened, and I don't think you need my predictions anymore. You won't see it on the mainstream television, but you will see it on social media. It is now undeniable that the Iranian attack last night was a stupendous success and has changed everything utterly.
Man, it just makes me so pissed. That's why I'm glad we have this program right here for real news, because the propaganda, you listen to the fake news right now, and they are saying complete failure, the humiliation of Iran, they missiles don't work, they hit the dirt, the grass. It's like, that's crazy. You willing to lie to you are putting your populations in danger, constantly lying to them. Because this is the same lie they said in Ukraine. Putin's hitting nothing. The Ukraine is winning. Till they couldn't lie anymore. It was crystal clear. Russia was hitting everything and Ukraine was getting humiliated. But right now, they're trying to tell people that the missiles that people see with their own eyes hitting the ground, they're calling a failure. I mean, you're talking about Nazi propaganda.
Just as it is undeniable that the Israeli invasion of the Lebanon so far is a complete failure. What I'm more interested in is the performance of the Western governments. Now, the United States and the United Kingdom say they do not support an Israeli attack on Iran. Of course, they could be lying. It's quite likely that they are lying, but they could also be telling the truth because they know that events may very well become uncontrollable thereafter. They do not want, I am sure, to be sucked into World War III over Israel and its determination to occupy a small piece of its neighbor south of the Litani River. That's not a casus belli that is worth it for them. So they may well be trying to stop Israel from responding, but the political forces on which Netanyahu depends, will not accept anything less. So, what do these Western governments do? Well, Keir Starmer, claiming to speak for Britain, made a prime ministerial announcement last night saying we stand and will always stand for Israel, despite the fact that a rather large majority of public opinion in Great Britain doesn't like Israel very much at all. There's only 16% of the British people who define themselves as supporters of Israel. And for a prime minister already out on a limb on everything from his wife's lingerie to his designer glasses, donated by a homosexual Bangladeshi billionaire, but not declared by either of them. And there are multiple inquiries now going on inside the British Parliament on what you might call Pantygate, or what I first coined as Pantygate, are enough of a problem for Keir Starmer, but he is a glutton for punishment. Or perhaps he's compromised in some way, but he's dug down. He has doubled down on his support for Israel. And he says, not me, that the British Royal Air Force was involved last night trying to defend Israel, in which case they didn't do a very good job, but in which case they have now made themselves belligerents in this conflict in Lebanon, in this conflict in Gaza, and now the conflict to come with Iran. That's a very dangerous place to be. Britain has many assets and many interests in the Persian Gulf. There are countries in the Persian Gulf that are effectively British and American military bases. They are now in very severe danger if the balloon fully goes up. The Royal Air Force Base in Cyprus, in Akrotiri, is now a legitimate target for Iran. If Iran's action was legal, and I have not yet seen anyone dispute that it was legal, an act of self-defense for multiple egregious offenses committed against them by Israel, if it was a legal action and Britain took the side of the illegal belligerent in the exchange, then Britain has made itself a legitimate target for retaliation by Iran.
That's a fact.
That's a very uncomfortable place for British people to find themselves in, especially when they don't much care for the third party, Israel, for whom it's all being done. But what does it do to the American presidential election? Is it the last waltz? I merely mention waltz because I saw J.D. Vance, metaphorically speaking, put to bed Tim Walz, a hapless fool of a man, in the vice presidential debate last night. I think that the current state of affairs makes a Kamala Harris presidential victory simply impossible. I see no path to victory for the Democrats in the midst of all this. It was bad enough during the Gaza genocide, but now we've got a Lebanese genocide and a war with Iran on the horizon. How does a party which depends on the votes of the minority ethnic communities, depends on the votes of students, depends on the votes of activists, depends on the votes of Muslims, of Arab Americans, in order to win a presidential election? How can it now happen? I personally know 80,000 Lebanese Americans in the town of Dearborn alone. Do you think any of them are going to be voting for Kamala Harris? That's why I predicted earlier, it's a long shot, I'd put money on Jill Stein defeating Kamala Harris in the state of Michigan. But it isn't just Michigan. It's Michigan, it's Wisconsin, it's Pennsylvania. And no Democrat can win the presidency if they lose any, never mind all, of those three states. So it's President Donald Trump that's coming up. which some of you may be celebrating on the principle that even a stopped clock is right twice a day, and Donald Trump might be at least a stopped clock. For me, the reason I would prefer Trump rather than Harris is that Trump will end the Ukraine war in very short order. And thus, one potential theater of World War III will be closed down. But Donald Trump is just as likely to create World War III in the Persian Gulf. He's just as likely to do anything and everything for this 7 million people, a colonial settlement on the Mediterranean, many thousands of miles away. And nobody, except in the darkest terms, can properly analyze exactly why. Whatever happened to America first? Whatever happened to making America great again? Well, why has the United
States just talking? Trump had an opportunity to go to war with Iran. He didn't want to do it. The U.S. military wanted him to go to war with Iran. He said, no, we don't need no big wall. Give me something else. They said, okay. They tricked him. They said, okay, we'll assassinate General Soleimani. This will show that you're tough and that you're not leaving Israel alone in the Middle East. That's how he got trapped into killing Soleimani. The first option was war with Iran. He didn't want that.
States and the United Kingdom, for that matter, so shackled themselves to a leader like Netanyahu, who's hated by at least half of the people in Israel, never mind the people of the world. Why have they done this? But done this, they have. And there's every possibility, therefore, that whilst we might not get World War III in Eastern Europe, we'll get it in the Eastern Mediterranean instead. We'll get it in the Persian Gulf instead. Well, look, there are multiple issues that are on the agenda tonight, and three brilliant guests. And my voice is going.
We got plenty of. Okay, let's have my brother.
Was born over the last few years as Professor Syed Mohammed Marandi came more and more often on the so-called mainstream television. But people like us were the first to recognize his brilliance. But his performance on mainstream news has literally had people standing up in their living rooms and cheering him on. He's been very loyal to us. He never says, no, I can't come on the mother of all talk shows because I'm going on CNN. Oh, far from it. Please welcome back Professor Syed Mohammed Marandi to the mother of all talk shows. Professor, congratulations on your media round. They are beyond compare, as I always knew and predicted they would be. But what about the Iranian response to the multiple egregious criminal offenses that Israel has committed against your country? Just in recent times, never mind longer ago than that. I called it earlier performative. I'm guessing you won't like that. But by performative, I mean this, that a deliberate attempt was made, and it was successful, not to kill anybody. A deliberate attempt was made not to destroy any Israeli civilian infrastructure, that the targets were entirely state and military targets. In that sense, it was performative, but a very impressive performance. That's my analysis. What's yours?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for your very kind words. And you're the master, and I learned from you, and I continue to learn from you. And I hope to be of some use to the audience and to work alongside you and a growing number of people who are active against war and genocide. Thankfully, things have changed a lot since a year or two ago. I think that we have to look at it in the broader context. In April, when the Iranian embassy was struck and the Iranians wanted to carry out a response, I'm sure you recall that Iran used a large number of drones and a few missiles. Most of the drones were all very old, dirt cheap, as they say, and the missiles were mostly old missiles. The Americans, they did the heavy lifting, and the Israelis brought most of them down to great cost. I think the Americans spent $2.5 billion and the Israelis almost $1.5 billion. But the real objective, and some of the more advanced missiles got through and hit their targets, but the real objective of Iran, the number one objective, was to gather intelligence about the defense capabilities that the Americans and the Israelis and the French and the British and everyone else had mustered together. And this time around, the Iranians were much more serious. And you're absolutely correct. The Iranians did not strike civilian targets. The Iranians struck key military targets. From what I'm hearing from Tehran, there was enormous damage to the infrastructure of the targets that were struck. And the Iranians said immediately that if the Israelis choose to respond, which I think will probably happen and will probably happen soon, that the Iranians will strike again, and it will strike again much harder. And I think probably the Americans and the Israelis miscalculated. They didn't think that Iran would hit so hard, or that the Iranians had such advanced weapons and in such large numbers. And I think if the Israelis do continue this, they will be outgunned. The Iranian strikes will be massive, and they can go on for weeks and months because Iran has many underground missile tunnels and missile bases across the.
Iran is a missile superpower. You see, they don't have a big air force and a big navy. No. They are a missile superpower. That's what they are. No, don't forget, Russia absolutely have been getting shipped missiles from Iran. Putin don't he because he don't want to use all his stockpile because he might have to get into it with NATO. So it's smart to go to some allies for the supplies here and now. North Korea, missile superpower. But Iran is a missile superpower. They absolutely can deal with the U.S., Israel, or whoever else in the Middle East. No, they can't come to America and defeat America. They're not planning on it. They plan on defeating Israel and the U.S. in the Middle East.
The country, which can't be hit. And the reason is that Iran prepared them for potential war with the United States. After the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, the Iranians began to develop these capabilities. So Israel is not the United States. It's completely dependent on the United States and the West to sustain itself. So I think that any further escalation by the Israelis actually hurts the Israeli regime more than anyone else and empowers the collective resistance and the axis of resistance. But I'm sure that the Israelis are hoping otherwise. But usually what I've noticed, at least, is that Western powers and the Israelis, since they look down upon the rest of the world, their calculations are usually made in arrogance. And that arrogance and hubris is what brings about their defeat. And I think we saw that in Gaza. We saw that alongside the border with Lebanon. They murdered Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. I was there. I was literally 1,000 meters away when they struck Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah but slaughtered hundreds of people I was there actually today as well. I went to see the neighborhood. They're still digging people out from under the rubble in that particular attack. They thought that this was a big win, but it wasn't. I think it raised the stature of Hezbollah and made Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah a bigger hero than it was perceived before. He's much more popular across the region and the world. Hezbollah is now, everyone is looking to Hezbollah. Its popularity is going to have an impact. And the soldiers and the commandos and the officers, they're extremely highly motivated. And I'm sure you've seen the news today, the Israelis tried to enter Lebanon and they were badly mauled by Hezbollah forces, and not by the Rizwan brigade. They have not been a part of the fighting yet. So I think the Israeli regime always overestimates its capabilities, underestimates its foes, and that is one reason why it's losing.
We'll come back to the Iran front in a minute. Let's go to the Lebanese front, which you have in any case segued into there. It was a very bad day for the Israeli invasion force. I say invasion force, but they're scarcely over the border and are already sustaining very serious damage. Because, of course, for Israelis who don't want to be there, whose mind is half on the beach, these are not people who particularly keen to die for Benjamin Netanyahu. Many of them may even be political opponents of his. Their morale must have taken a hell of a beating today, on day one, in the first field, in the first forest. What do you say?
I agree completely. And I think it was both a combination of arrogance, but also the fact that many of these Israelis are not prepared to fight. They've, first of all, been fighting for almost a year now in Gaza. They're tired. They've had many casualties. The reservists, many of them are not performing well at all, according to the report. Some are not even reporting to duty. But also, you're absolutely correct. The Israelis have been pampered by the collective West. The West has been pampering this regime all the time. Otherwise, without the West, it would not last more than a few days on the battlefield. And so these men and women, their lives have been very easy over there. They were only used to, when they were wearing uniform, they were used to humiliating Palestinians in the West Bank.
That's a fact.
Or guarding the apartheid wall in Gaza or the West Bank, and shooting at people who approached the apartheid wall, and shooting them in the head or in the knee and having target practice. This was the very difficult work that they had back then. Or they go into the West Bank, they go into houses, beat people up, take over their houses, take photos of themselves humiliating Palestinians. That was the usual job that they had, not fighting a serious military force like Hezbollah, which is highly trained and which has prepared itself for this war for the last 18 years. They've been developing thousands of kilometers of tunnels throughout the south and central part of Lebanon, and probably the north as well. And the Israelis, they thought that they scored decisive wins by assassinating a few people, but you know this better than I. Beirut has always been the weakest link. It is a center for espionage. This was the case during the PLO here. And Western embassies, Western journalists, Western NGOs, especially over the last couple of decades, this has become a thing. All of these are means to gather intelligence. All these impoverished refugees, but also people like the right-wing militias. You recall Jajja's Lebanese forces who were allied to the Israelis. And during the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, they, alongside the Israelis, went into the Sabra Shatila camp, which is not very far from where we are. And in less than 48 hours, they killed almost 4,000 people, Palestinians, ordinary Palestinians, and some Lebanese. So these massacres that we're seeing today carried out by the Israeli regime and their allies, they're not new, and it doesn't have anything to do with Hezbollah. It goes back way before Hezbollah. But the point is that Lebanon is not Beirut. Beirut, the Israeli regime scored some successes, which I think in the long run are detrimental to Israeli interests, because Hezbollah has become more popular and Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has become extremely popular outside of those beyond the people who used to, or who always loved him. And you could see that on the streets over when it was announced that he was martyred. But Hezbollah's capabilities across the country, its military capabilities, are untouched. The underground capabilities are completely untouched. And the Israelis have, as you pointed out, they have not yet set foot into this country, and they're already suffering major casualties. Imagine what it will be like when they try to get in to the country and advance 20 kilometers inside or 30 kilometers inside. It'll be a bloodbath.
It'll be a nightmare.
And it's carnage as usual for the poor prisoners in the Gaza concentration camp. So angry were the Israeli regime at Iran's response. They slaughtered children in an orphanage. Now, actually, we've become inured to hospitals being destroyed, schools being destroyed. It's a new low for Netanyahu to murder children in an orphanage. Is the possibility of the wider war likely to make things even worse for the people in Gaza, or might Israel's attention have to be diverted elsewhere?
Well, I'd just like to add that after Iran's retaliation to Israeli provocations, and I just want to remind the audience, and I'm sure they know because your audience is very politically aware, the Iranian response was because of the murder of Ismail Haniyeh, the martyrdom of Ismail Haniyeh, who was a guest of the president of Iran and his companion, and also the murder of the Iranian general, and of course Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and a host of other reasons and provocations that the Israelis carried out against Iran. There are a host of reasons why the Iranians retaliated, but instead of and the Iranians, as we were discussing earlier, struck military targets as revenge. Last night here in Beirut, the Israelis pounded southern Beirut till morning, and today we went to Dahieh, downtown Beirut, which you know, and you've had TV shows there. They brought down many buildings, apartment blocks, and we went today and saw some of these blocks that were struck this morning. There was smoke rising, and they were constantly telling us to move, to leave, so that because they were afraid of more airstrikes. But when I was walking through, in one area, there were 5 apartment blocks, we were told, because there was just rubble. They said there were 5 apartment blocks here. And I was just thinking, maybe people right now are still alive underneath. And just thinking about it made me feel sick. So out of revenge, they went and slaughtered orphans in Gaza and started destroying southern Beirut. Yet Western journalists, for the most part, mainstream journalists, legacy media journalists, are only talking, they erase this from history. Even when they murdered Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, when he was martyred, they focus on saying Hezbollah stronghold, Hezbollah site, whereas they slaughtered hundreds of people in order to kill him. And they said that, well, they're embedded in the population and they're hiding among the population. And then last night we saw CNN in Tel Aviv say the Mossad building is in a densely populated area and people are at risk. Why Why doesn't CNN, why doesn't Western media call that an example of the Israeli regime hiding among its own civilian population? In fact, Hezbollah created those tunnels under Beirut so that the Israelis would not bother to strike civilians because it was so deep. But they used 83 one-ton missiles, the Israeli regime. It was amazing. As I said, I was close by in order to kill him. And today, when we went there, they were, as I said, they're still digging people out. So this is a barbaric regime. But when I've been speaking to most journalists, most mainstream Western journalists, even some of them in Beirut, it doesn't seem to matter to them. It's about Israel it's all about Israel defending itself. Everything is about Israel defending itself. It's stunning.
Because they call him out.
Yes, banal but stunning. We're used to it by now. I can see it still surprises you. Finally, Professor, let us return to the Iran front. You believe, I believe, and almost 3/4 of our audience already believes in our poll that Netanyahu is going to attack Iran. Of course, there's a spectrum of potential attacks. We've seen that. But let's assume a significant Israeli attack on Iran. Will Iran respond immediately, or will we be back in the same territory we've been in over the last couple of months, in your opinion? I know you don't make these decisions, you don't speak for the government in Iran, but as an acute observer, is it likely that Iran would respond immediately to such an egregious assault?
Well, George, over the past few weeks, I've been saying that Iran is going to retaliate, and as things went forward, more and more people started attacking me and saying that I'm talking nonsense and that the Iranians won't retaliate. But ultimately, they did last night, and it was a heavy strike. I have no doubt that if the Israelis target Iran in the coming hours or in the coming days, the Iranians will retaliate very harshly, and it will be a more heavy strike, a significantly heavier strike than what we saw yesterday. And I believe that the Iranians are prepared to continue this indefinitely. And the Israelis can't do this indefinitely. It's a small regime. It's fully dependent on the West, but it's also fighting in the West Bank, subjugating Palestinians. It's fighting on the Lebanese border, and it's being badly beaten, as we've seen today. It's failed after a year in Gaza. In the Red Sea, the Americans have failed to do anything. The Iraqis are outraged and want revenge. The resistance in Iraq and Syria will continue to work against the regime. Any escalation is going to hurt the Israelis more. And the only thing that I think is possible to, at least in the eyes of Netanyahu, to save him. Because I think that Netanyahu knows he will lose against Hezbollah, and I think he knows he'll lose against Iran. I think he's desperate, and wants to get the Americans into the war. And of course, that shows he doesn't even care about the Americans. Just like when he used a supply chains for electronic goods, he discredited Western companies and companies linked to countries affiliated with the West. I'm never going to buy any Western products anymore, electrical appliances or laptops or anything like that, because I don't trust them anymore. So he doesn't care about brand America or brand Europe or brand Korea or Japan or Taiwan. He cares about himself. He doesn't even care about Israel, in my opinion. But if the Americans fall into his trap and get involved in the war, the Americans will be confronting a very different situation from the past. The resistance in Iraq will sweep America away. They will be expelled from Iraq. There'll be nothing left. And the Persian Gulf region all American bases will be destroyed if there's fighting between Iran and the United States. Regimes that host Americans, their oil and gas installations will be destroyed because they'll be hostile. And some of your viewers may say, well, Iran doesn't have that capability. The Americans have lost the war in the Red Sea to Ansarullah, which has just come out of a 7-year-long genocidal war where everything in the country was destroyed. And the Americans have been unable to open the Red Sea. Does anyone really think that the Americans are going to be able to open up the Persian Gulf to oil and gas exports when Iran has all these underground bases, drone and missile bases that can take out all these oil and gas installations that are right alongside the Iranian border, and all those tankers that are easy targets for Iran? That would mean oil and gas the price would go through the roof, and it would bring down the global economy, and millions of people would be on the move. So I think it's very important for Americans and Europeans to recognize that this type of war would change the world. It could potentially destroy the world economy, and the lives of everyone would be severely impacted as a result. So they should think twice before sacrificing themselves for a war criminal and corrupt individual like Netanyahu.
Professor Syed Mohammed Marandi, as always, a tour of the horizon, a tour
being sold a war in the Middle East right before your eyes. Just turn on CNN or Fox News. Heck, watch the debate last night to see how this CBS News framed what's about to happen. And this propaganda machine is working overtime right now. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is preparing for all-out war with Iran. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan just admitted the truth on national television. Watch.
This morning, the president said there would be severe consequences if Iran carried out this attack. What are the consequences, and are they more severe than sanctions?
Totally legitimate question, and that answer will come based on the conversations and consultations we have with our Israeli counterparts. It's too soon for me to stand before you today and give you an answer. What I can tell you is this. We are proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case. Thank you very much.
Well, that didn't sit too well with members of Congress. Congressman Thomas Massey just tweeted this moments ago: work with Israel? Excuse me? The Constitution requires you work with Congress. Well, don't let the Constitution get in the way of your war. Someone who knows all about selling wars is Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector. He watched them try to manufacture a war with Iraq. He tweeted yesterday, Israel took up the sword. Israel shall now perish by the sword. Iran today proved Israel cannot defend itself, even with the full weight of the United States behind it. Any Israeli retaliation, it will result in greater destruction until Israel is no more. And former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter joins us now. Scott, good to see you.
Good to be here. Israel going to commit suicide.
Do you believe they're manufacturing this war despite evidence to the contrary about what's actually happening right now? I mean, you see all the major networks, the propaganda machine went into overdrive yesterday, whether you were watching CNN or Fox News, they're all on the same page. And the Biden administration seems to be on the same page. Is that where we're headed?
Well, I actually think they're trying to manufacture the peace. You see, they can't be honest about what happened. What happened is that Iran, hit Israel with an unprecedented level of precision violence. Israel has never been struck in this manner in its history. No nation has. No nation has absorbed 180 plus modern ballistic missiles impacting on its soil with great precision. I think, that fact right there, there's a reason why Benjamin Netanyahu's voice was shaky and his hands were shaking when he was issuing his response in the aftermath of the strike, because he knows the truth. that Iran can reach out and touch any place in Israel anytime it wants with as much violence as it wants to put on it. Iran this time struck purely military targets, and they were struck in a way not to kill people, but to send the signal of destruction. And that signal was sent. Ask any Israeli soldier that watched those Iranian missiles come in unimpeded, impacting on the most sensitive military sites in Israel. They know what the truth is. Everybody knows what the truth is. But you see, if you acknowledge that, if you acknowledge the fact that Israeli emperor has no clothes when it comes to self-defense, this creates an extremely destabilizing new reality in the Middle East, one that could prompt an escalation as Israel seeks to restore some sort of deterrence posture, a viable deterrence posture. And this might mean relying on its nuclear weapons capability. That's the last thing it's wants. So the first thing that came out, it happened
lose. It's a lose-lose. They can't wipe Iran off the map with a nuclear weapon. They can destroy a bunch of shit, kill a bunch of people, but then Iran can unleash 60,000. I mean, they can unleash total devastation of Israel. You see, if they want to be suicidal, they can try to nuke Iran, but then it wouldn't be a state of Israel anymore.
This attack was a failure. I mean, you can't hide the what we saw take place. It's not a failure, but it's spun as a failure. That the missile defense.
Let me play this for you, because this was during the debate last night. And almost immediately, right after this was happening, and on our show yesterday, we were highlighting all of the responses from the Biden administration, the Fox News responses. They were all saying, this was a miserable failure. It just goes to show you the strength of the United States in its support of Israel, Israel's Arrow system, its Iron Dome system, that it shot down these missiles and ballistic missiles. And then during the debate last night, here was Margaret Brennan in her very first question, just making a statement that's a total lie. Watch this.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action.
So she comes right out and says it was a failure thanks to the United States and joint Israeli response. I mean, what is she? To me, it was pure propaganda.
Well, I mean, we've long known that the mainstream media doesn't serve a journalistic function. They serve as stenographers for the government. And she was simply putting out the message of the U.S. government, of the Israeli government. Let's remember, we knew this attack was coming. No, Iran didn't pick up the phone and call us, but the Iranians aren't stupid. They're actually some of the smartest people in the world today. They made sure that their missiles were observable by American reconnaissance, so that the American reconnaissance could notify the Israelis, so that the Israelis could get their personnel in the bunkers and get their high value asset off the ground. I think we need to be careful about some of the reporting coming out about 20 F-35s destroyed, etc. Unless an F-35 was a hangar queen, meaning it couldn't take off because of maintenance. I believe that all functioning F-35s, all functioning F-15Is were off the ground in the air, preserving those resources because the Israelis knew what was about to happen. They knew that these critical airfields were about to be saturated with missiles they couldn't intercept. But the other thing that happened here is, how do you absorb this and not be compelled to undertake an immediate violent reaction? Well, you have to minimize what has just happened. The Biden administration can't afford a war. Understand, they literally have the perfect storm of economic crises unfolding as we speak. We have a hurricane that the Biden administration has just fumbled the response to. And there are many Americans right now saying, why isn't there more money for these people in Western North Carolina while you're sending billions off to Israel and Ukraine? We have a longshoreman strike right now on the East Coast that's going to paralyze the American economy if it's not resolved soon. And again, people are going to ask the question, where is the Biden administration and all this? And by extension, both these questions automatically bring up, where is Kamala Harris? Where is the Harris campaign? Where is the heir apparent in all of this? This is devastating for the Harris campaign. They may be able to resolve each one of these with a more focused effort on hurricane response, maybe some sort of negotiated into the longshoreman strike before the holiday season kicks in. But I just want to point out, 1992, Bill Clinton's campaign, James Carville's famous sticker on the door, it's the economy, stupid. This election will be won and lost because of the economy. And right now the economy is ready to tank. So the last thing you need now is the United States and Israel to do a retaliation against Iran that could provoke a regional war that would shut down Middle East oil supplies right on the eve of winter, create a global energy crisis that would cause immediate spikes in the price of gasoline at the pump, oil in the tanks before we have to heat our houses before winter. This would be the end of the Biden administration, the end of the aspirations of any Harris administration. It would be the death of the Democratic Party. So when Jake Sullivan says we're working with the Israelis on a response, it's not that the United States is sitting there saying, okay, let's bomb this, let's bomb that, let's bomb this, let's bomb that. This is a political game. The United States is working with Israel on how to ensure that they don't go rushing up the escalation ladder in an uncontrolled fashion into a war. What can Israel do that prevents a broader war? Israel needs to respond. They have no choice. I think Iran understands this. The question is, what will Israel do? If they respond in a precipitous manner, striking nuclear infrastructure or oil production, gas production, Iran has no choice but to bring the hammer down. And everything we just saw will be repeated over and over and over again until Israel is no more. Take up the sword, die by the sword. Israel knows this. They understand this. So does the United States. So does Iran. So Israel, I think, with American assistance, is going to carry out a limited strike, and then diplomatic pressure is going to be put on Iran to not overreact, to bring an end to this. For instance, we know that prior to this, the Iranian president, while he was in New York as part of the General Assembly debate at the United Nations, talked about renewing diplomatic engagement with the United States over reviving the JCPOA. The United States could very well come in and say, yes, we're ready. We're ready to do that. We're ready to sit down. We're ready to do that, to have diplomatic engagement with the Iranians if Iran doesn't overreact to what Israel must do, because Israel must strike back in a way that preserves the facade of Israeli deterrence. But the bottom line is this: beyond the PR campaign, everybody who's anybody in the international security business understands exactly what happened yesterday. Iran proved that Israel cannot defend itself, even with the assistance of the United States, that Israel is a sitting duck. And the moment Iran decides to fire even larger quantities of missiles at Israel, Israel will cease to exist as a modern nation state. That is the reality. That's what happened yesterday. And that outcome is so terrible that nobody can admit it.
Yeah, and they're not admitting it on national television. And of course, you see all of the people across all of the major networks saying that nothing happened, no damage, no issue, no problem. The might of the Israeli Iron Dome and Arrow system and the United States prevented wide-scale destruction. But that seems to be not at all what happened. Before I want to ask you about the response a little bit more in detail here, but what's your assessment from your sources on how devastating this attack actually was? You heard Margaret Brennan lying to the American people, and my sources pointing out a number of different strikes that hit very important infrastructure. What are your sources telling you? I mean, we have 181 ballistic missiles. Iran says about 90% of them hit their target. We can't verify that, of course, but what were you able to verify through your sources?
Well, again, my sources are very limited to some phone calls with people in Iran, and who spending hours looking at the videos. The Iranian government has released a target list, and the video data seems to back up the fact that two major air bases, Nevatim in the south where the F-35s are, and another one further north where the F-15Is are, were struck by a significant number of missiles in a simultaneous attack that was designed to overwhelm any air defense. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand, the reality of what happened there. You don't have that many missiles hit at the same time with that destructive capacity without inflicting serious harm on a facility. And I do want to remind people, in case you're wondering about the accuracy of these systems, Iran fired a dozen missiles against the Al-Assad air base back in 2020 after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. And they hit pinpoint precision every bunker they were aiming at on that base. This is the accuracy of the system. So I think once we get satellite imagery, if we get at satellite imagery, you're going to see that there were pinpoint attacks on hangars, on support facilities, etc. But again, because Israel had at least 2 hours to prepare for this, and there are things that can be done when you look at where the missiles are being launched from. You can do predictive analysis of the arc, the range arcs, etc. The Israelis had a good idea what targets were vulnerable for attack, and I believe they took the appropriate measures to eliminate casualties. And this was Iran's goal and objective. There were a couple places, I believe, some of the radar facilities and some of the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 missile defense facilities were hit without warning, meaning there were no sirens that came into play because they used advanced systems, maybe the Fatah 2, that came in and struck these facilities without warning, destroying them. Israel won't admit this. There may have been casualties there. We don't know. But on the air bases, I would be surprised if there were any casualties in terms of manpower losses, because there was no reason for there to be. You had plenty of time to get people out into the bunkers. Israel wasn't looking to inflict human cost. Iran wasn't looking to inflict a human cost on Israel. Unlike the Israelis, which killed over 1,000 Lebanese civilians in their collective punishment of Beirut for Hezbollah's actions. Iran wasn't seeking civilian casualties. They were seeking to prove the point. We can hit you anytime, any place with as much destructive power as we want. You can't stop us.
Which brings me to the response now. And you mentioned that Israel will have to respond. And of course, if you watched mainstream media yesterday, all over, you had former generals on TV. Everyone's saying Israel has to strike back and annihilate Iran. They have to go after their oil and gas infrastructure. They have to go after their nuclear infrastructure. These were common themes all across the airwaves yesterday, that they need to wipe Iran off the map. Oil and gas, and then we've seen videos of Iranians in long lines filling up their cars because of what might happen to the oil infrastructure. What do you think the response will be, and what joint response from the United States and Israel on targeting? With just something small and we go to the table for peace talks?
Well, I don't believe it'll involve Iran's nuclear infrastructure, because this is a existential Iranian capability. And if you attack this, then Iran will have no choice but to threaten Israel's existential survival. Plus, an attack against a nuclear facility, especially a reactor or place that has nuclear fuel that could lead to contamination, it opens the door for Iran to retaliate by striking Dimona. And nobody wants that. So I hope that calmer heads prevail. To strike Iran's energy infrastructure, this will immediately result in Iran destroying regional energy production capacity: Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Iran will destroy it in a way that it won't be able to recover, not for decades. And that's the end of the global economy. So again, I would hope that the Biden administration would weigh in on that and say no. Look, the Iranians, again, by choosing the weapon system they chose, I think they defined the target deck for the United States and for Israel. I think that the bombing of a missile production facility, maybe one near Tehran, so the explosions could be seen in Tehran, sending a signal, would be sufficient. It's something that Iran could easily recover from. It doesn't cause permanent damage, but it's something that Israel could say, see, look what we can do. And that might be something the United States would work on. Now, here's the interesting part, though. The idea that this can happen automatically without consequence is absurd. Israel will take great risks going in to do this. There's a chance Israeli aircraft could be shot down. Russia has deployed S-400 systems into Iran. These systems are probably manned by Russian soldiers because Iran hasn't had time to train up on this. Russia is reportedly to have sent advanced Su-35 fighters into Iran. Again, the Iranians aren't competent in the operation of this aircraft. There's a good chance that Russians will be flying these aircraft, which means that if Israeli aircraft enter Iranian space, we have a chance for an Israeli versus Russian standoff. People say, well, how could that? Well, it happened. Look at Vietnam. Look at Korea. Russian pilots flying North Vietnamese and Korean aircraft. Look at Egypt against Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Russian pilots flying Egyptian aircraft. That's the situation we face here. And again, this is where the United States might come in and tell Russia, look, this is a face-saving gesture. You got to let it go through. Tell the Iranians this is it. There will be nothing else. We'll get back to leveling off. This is where I think the United States is coming in. So, Jake Sullivan's not lying when he's saying America's working with the Israelis, but it's designed to make America look tough. What America is really doing is an act of desperation, trying to prevent this conflict from spinning out of control because of the devastating economic and political consequences it will have for the United States. And it's in Russia's interest, by the way. I just want to point this out. People say, well, why would Russia do that? Well, at the end of this month, Russia's hosting the BRICS summit.
Right.
One way to sink the BRICS summit is to throw the world into a global energy security-driven economic crisis, where everybody's talking about peace in the Middle East, and nobody's talking about the new BRICS infrastructures that Russia's trying to put in place. So Russia has a vested interest in trying to get this thing nipped in the bud. And if the United States came,
no, they don't. It's in Putin's interest to have all of the Western attention in the Middle East and offer Ukraine all of the NATO's weaponry and funds going to Israel and not Ukraine. That's what's in Putin's best interest. And I know Putin's thinking about that. He can wrap the whole BRICS summit in my ass. They can have another summit. So he got one chance to finish this NATO war in Ukraine. And if he can shift the war theater to the Middle East, and he is a chess man, I know he's thinking that. Oh, shit, you crazy. He should be
came forward with a reasonable faith.
Iran, make sure Iran don't lose, but make it forcing the U.S. and France and Britain to have to go defend Israel in a big war over there.
A saving gesture that would get Israel to back down. Russia might be able to make some phone calls. Remember, the Russian prime minister visited Iran right before this happened. Shoigu, the former defense minister, was there. There's another delegation there right now. Russia is definitely engaged with Iran, trying to ensure that what happens here doesn't spin out of control.
Bullshit. They can't ensure. They can't ensure. Russia can't ensure shit, and the U.S. can't ensure shit. They passed all of that. Now they can only make sure that their side wins what's going to happen. All Russia can do is make sure Iran is totally prepared for what's going to happen. All the U.S. can do is make sure Israel got the best chance they can. U.S. can't stop Israel, and Russia damn sure not going to be able to stop. They can't stop Iran. They killed Nasrallah. It's too much on the line. They threatened to kill Khomeini. Are you crazy?
President Zelensky came to the United States, visited an arms manufacturer in Scranton, Pennsylvania, gave a speech at the UN, made the rounds at Washington, went home empty-handed. Prime Minister Netanyahu gave a very belligerent, contemptuous speech to an empty General Assembly chamber, went to an office in the same building and ordered a murder 5,000 miles away, which took place. What do you see happening?
Well, as I understand it, that Zelensky did not go home completely empty-handed, that some promises were made for more money and equipment. Now, how much it was, I've heard various figures. I think we have to accept the fact that the war is obviously lost in Ukraine. I don't think there are very many people who privately reject that notion, but they're going to sustain the facade that there is a Ukrainian government of some significance in Kiev, at least until after the election. So he was treated accordingly. I think the other issue is a much more serious one right now, because everything strikes me in Washington as kind of being on autopilot. We're sort of flying as a nation in the direction of a major regional war in the Middle East, and we're treating the Ukrainian disaster with the usual disinterest that arises when it becomes clear that you've lost. All of it is bad news for the American people. And what was even more striking to me than what you've mentioned is that last night, the word Ukraine did not even come up for discussion. I had hoped that perhaps future Vice President Vance would have at least asked about Ukraine and what had happened to the hundreds of billions of dollars and many millions of tons of equipment and ammunition that had been shipped over there. But it never came up.
How dangerous was the Israeli assassination of Nasrallah using 160,000 pounds of bombs to kill one person and a dozen or so people around him?
I think we need to understand that it could not have happened at all without us. We have considerable ISR assets, Air Force and Army, Navy, engaged in supporting the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and its attacks on Lebanon. So I think that's the first thing. We have the capability to harvest very sensitive information, voice and otherwise, that the Israelis simply don't have. And then we can laze these targets, providing very exact data to the Israelis, which we did. So I think we have to understand that when you see these kinds of successful operations take place, it's not an Israel-only operation by any means. Was it dangerous to do this? Not from the standpoint of Mr. Netanyahu. And I think we need to understand something that clearly is not understood in Tehran. I don't think it's understood in Moscow. And that is that Mr. Netanyahu is waging a ruthless war of extermination against his enemies. He's already told us who they are: the people in Gaza, the Arabs on the West Bank, and the Arabs south of the Litani River who are part of Hezbollah. And in the meantime, he's also struck a number of very lucrative targets across Syria. So this is a very powerful war that's underway, and we're on autopilot. We're just flying in the direction. We're helping it. We're enabling it. We're pushing it. And I'm sure you've seen the interview with, I think it's Colonel Jacques Beau, who talks about the fact that we have been encouraging this behavior from the beginning. And I think we have, and we are. So the American people aren't being consulted, and there's really no debate about it because everyone in Washington is quite comfortable with what's happening.
Did the White House encourage the Israeli government to invade southern Lebanon?
It would appear that they have. That seems to be widespread consensus. Nothing is happening that Washington has not wanted to happen, and that makes perfect sense, Judge, for the reasons I just outlined. We control all the resources, and we have access to and dispose over very considerable sensitive technologies. So if we don't want something to happen, it's not going to happen. And anything that does happen happens because we've allowed it.
But by what constitutional or moral standard do we wage war against Hezbollah? We haven't declared war on Hezbollah. It poses no threat whatsoever to the United States. We don't have a treaty of alliance with Israel. I'm wearing my constitutional scholar hat.
Well, we're in a strange set of relations with Israel that are analogous to some extent to FDR's relations with the British Empire and the Soviet Union before World War II. Very few people are aware that FDR dispatched Harry Hopkins to Moscow in July of 1941 to offer Stalin virtually anything he wanted and anything he needed. And we, of course, were not at war with Germany. The bombing at Pearl Harbor had not yet happened. We had a war ongoing for almost 2.5 years, trying to provoke the Germans into attacking our warships when we actively aided the British and Canadian navies in moving supplies to Great Britain. So this is a similar set of circumstances. And I think it also has potentially very grave consequences for us. But as you point out, none of this is constitutional, but very little of what FDR did was constitutional. So I don't think anyone is remotely interested in discussing constitutional law at the moment.
What will the consequences to us be? Will it be Russia coming to the aid of Iran? Will it be American boys coming home in body bags?
Well, I think we have to reckon with some losses in the Middle East. I don't see how we avoid them. We know that we've had losses in Ukraine. It's simply being decided not to report those publicly and to dismiss the allegation that Americans have been killed in Ukraine by finding cover stories for them, dying in other settings, other places, particularly in the United States. I think things in the Middle East will be different. It'll be harder to provide those cover stories, harder to conceal. And the reason is very simple. This ruthless war of extermination is going to be confronted soon by overwhelming deadly force provided first and foremost by Iran, also augmented and extended by Russia, and I would argue eventually the rest of the Islamic world. But we've always said this, and you, Judge, have had these discussions with others on your show. No one in the region wants a war with Israel in the United States. The only people that are interested in a war in the region consist of Israel and primarily us. That's it. No one else really wants a war. And this has now attracted the attention of everyone in the Islamic world. We've been listening to lots of harumphs and threats, most of which have gone nowhere from Turkey. But that is changing now. And the Turks are making it very clear that the catastrophic destruction of Lebanon is not something they're going to stand by and tolerate. They've got 3 or 4 million refugees on their territory at the moment. They can't take any more. 1 million people have left Lebanon. More than 7,000 people in Lebanon have been killed, and these are hardly Hezbollah fighters. All of this is coming together. We're seeing action in Iraq, action in Syria, action in Yemen, and Egypt and Jordan continue to reach a boiling point. Precisely when that will boil over and change the governments is anyone's guess, but I think that's inevitable. So we're on the march to a regional war that always has the potential to go global. The Russians are well prepared to fight now. They're stronger militarily than they have been in 30 years. And the same thing is true, unfortunately, with China. The Chinese don't want any sort of confrontation, and they're undoubtedly sweating bullets over the Straits of Hormuz. But the Israelis are determined to hit those Iranian oil facilities. And I think we're going to see that once that occurs, it will bring in the rest of the actors who are actively opposed to Israel.
Tell me about Jordan. The population of Jordan cannot be in sync with the king. The king used the Jordanian military to help Israel defend itself the other night when, I guess it was last night, Israel time, when Iran sent 200 missiles there. I'll ask you about the missiles in a minute. But is the king of Jordan on thin ice because of the overwhelming, nearly unanimous view of the public over which he claims to reign that Israel is the enemy?
Yes, well, remember the majority of the people serving in the Jordanian army tend to be Bedouin in origin. In other words, people from Bedouin origins, much like the king himself. But he's got 11.2 million Palestinians living in Jordan. and they are very anxious to help their brothers on the West Bank and in Gaza. So they're fuming. When does this change? I know that the Iranians undoubtedly have agents on the ground in Jordan, probably pushing levers there in the hopes that the Jordanians will rise up, push the government out of business and take the reins of power themselves. I'd be very surprised if that was not also the case in Egypt. In both cases, however, both sovereign leaders are entirely dependent upon the military. And as long as the military does not take them into custody, remove them, assassinate them, they will stay. The question is, where does the military stand at this point? I know from firsthand discussions, people just returning from Egypt, that the Egyptian military is ashamed of themselves and embarrassed that they are doing nothing against Israel. I suspect you have a similar attitude in Jordan.
Chris, do we have the clip? It's not on today's list, but do you still have the clip of King Abdullah of Jordan addressing the United Nations? He'll look for that, Colonel, and then I'll ask you what you think of it. He was harshly critical of Israel at the UN, and then he used his military to defend Israel when the Iranians attacked. What happened the other night? What type of weaponry was hurled by Iran at Israel? What got through, and what damage was done, as far as you are able to understand just 24 hours later?
Right. Well, most of the weapon systems were medium-range ballistic missiles, as I understand it. These are not hypersonic, most of them. How many of them ultimately penetrated or simply attracted attention from the air defense systems, the Arrow 2 or the Iron Dome or our own Patriot systems? I don't know. But I do know that some number, and I don't know how many, hypersonic missiles were used, and they all penetrated the air and missile defense system. No question about it.
Did they reach, I don't remember the name of it, it's a major Israeli air base in the middle of the desert. It's the place from which the jets that bombed and killed Nasrallah came and to which they returned. Did the Iranian missiles reach that military base and do any damage there?
Well, they reached the base. I think it's in the Tima air base. At the same time, there were claims made that some F-35s were damaged or destroyed, along with some F-16s. We have no way of confirming that, and that also seems unlikely. I imagine the Israelis probably launched most of those aircraft in order to ensure they were not on the ground when the missile attack started. And remember, the Iranians signaled the United States and virtually everybody else when they were going to launch. This was another attempt to demonstrate, I think, Iran's precision strike capability in a way that would awaken some concern in Washington and Jerusalem. It hasn't. In other words, this was another, if you will excuse the expression, wasted opportunity on the Iranian side. And I think they're going to be hit very, very hard by the Israelis in response. The Israelis do not believe in symmetrical warfare. Everything they do is inevitably asymmetrical. In other words, if you want to kill the flea, you use a jackhammer. You don't use a fly swatter. And so I think Putin and Xi have been advising the Iranian leadership to embrace restraint on the assumption that if they restrain themselves, a war can be avoided and negotiations will take place and can sort things out. I don't see any evidence for that. I mean, Israel has failed thus far to achieve its objectives in Gaza. It's also failing in its objectives against Hezbollah, although that has now just started on the ground. How serious it is, I don't know. And then they have not achieved their objective in Iran, which is to destroy that regime and remove Iran as a great power in the region, period. So those things are unachieved. And I think there's no evidence that there's any willingness under any circumstances in Jerusalem or Washington to contemplate any sort of talks or negotiations over anything until those objectives are secured.
The two principal American diplomats / bureaucrats negotiating or dealing with the Israeli government on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis for the United States, Brett McGurk and Amos Hochstein, are bellicose and in favor of war, are they not?
That seems pretty clear. I don't see any evidence to the contrary. So they're not representing the supposed interest that exists, if it exists at all, inside the Beltway in Washington for a negotiated outcome. On the contrary, they are completely aligned with what I just described.
Right.
So I think the Iranians have wasted time, money, and resources. They should prepare for an all-out assault, which is coming. The same thing is true for Hezbollah. So the time for restraint, as far as they are concerned, I think is over. But they'll have to figure that out on their own.
We're going to play the clip from the King of Jordan. You tell me if this is sincere or if this is consistent with the behavior of his military the other night. Chris, while we're playing this, can you find the comment? Maybe here, and I just don't see it, by President Biden yesterday, saying that whatever the Iranians did was defeated and ineffective. But in the meantime, here's the King of Jordan at the United Nations last week.
In the absence of global accountability, repeated horrors are normalized, threatening to create a future where anything is permitted, anywhere in the world. Those who continue to propagate the idea of Jordan as an alternative homeland. So let me be very, very clear. That will never happen. We will never accept the forced displacement of Palestinians, which is a war crime.
He a treasonous traitor in his paper.
For years, the Arab world has extended a hand to Israel through the Arab Peace Initiative, offering full recognition and normalization in exchange for peace. But consecutive Israeli governments, emboldened by years of impunity, have rejected peace and chosen confrontation instead.
Trying to accomplish by speaking out of one side of his mouth and shooting weapons out of the other side, if you'll pardon the awkward analogy.
Well, he sounds like the man who beats his wife periodically and then is subsequently remorseful and says, I will never beat my wife again, and then proceeds to go back and beat her. This is eloquent, but irrelevant. Unless he, General Sisi in Egypt, take the reins and assert themselves against Israel in some fashion, everything he described happening will happen. In other words, he will watch as millions of Arabs are driven out or killed from Gaza and ultimately the West Bank. If nothing is done, then the same thing will eventually happen to Hezbollah unless Iran intervenes to come to its assistance. And you have to know that behind the scenes, the Arabs in Jordan and in Egypt are talking privately with the Turks and saying, you know, historically, we live in your sphere of influence, yet you are all talk and no action. Why do you expect us to impale ourselves on Israel if you are unwilling to do anything? Remember, Iran is a Shiite power. The Persian Iran that we talk about is an outsider in that area. They don't view the Iranians as natural leaders inside the Islamic world. But the truth is, thus far, it's the Shiites who've been leading and the Sunnis who have done almost nothing. It's a very strange set of circumstances.
Here's President Biden yesterday afternoon. Tell me if you agree with him.
And they took the leadership of the
words about Iran's missile attack on Israel today. At my direction, the United States military actively supported the defense of Israel, and we're still assessing the impact. But based on what we know now, the attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. And this is testament to Israeli military capability and the U.S. military. It's also a testament to intensive planning between the United States and Israel to anticipate and defend against the brazen attack we expected.
Defeated and ineffective?
Well, certainly it was not defeated per se because it was not designed to kill large numbers of people. But at the same time, it turned out to be ineffective. I think that's arguably true. Strategically, I'm sure the Israelis breathed a huge sigh of relief. You're talking about the capability to launch 100 missiles an hour for 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, 96 hours with deadly accuracy.
This is Iran's capability?
Yes. And that has not happened. And as long as that does not happen, I think the Israelis are going to take advantage of the opportunity. They'd be fools not to. And they're going to go after Iran with a vengeance. There's a struggle inside Iran right now between the new regime, which is actually moderate in its outlook and wants to align itself with what we consider to be normalcy in the world and normalcy in the region. People in Iran who are on the other side of that argument, the so-called hardliners, they're saying you're fools. You've lost your minds.
That would be the Ayatollah and his crew.
Ayatollah.
Well, I would think so, but I don't want to name names and impute things to people without knowing precisely who they are. But the bottom line is
understood.
Bottom line is they very definitely are standing around and they're saying, "What are you, crazy? The Israelis and the Americans are coming for you. They are going to destroy you. Why are you holding back?"
Why are you holding back? What is President Putin doing while this is happening? Is he talking to the new president of Iran saying, be restrained? Or how can I help?
There is some evidence that the former chief of defense minister, if you will, Shoigu, may well be on the ground in Iran, along with the current Russian prime minister and thousands of Russian technicians and military advisors, trying to put together and maintain this elaborate air and missile defense network, along with probably other weapon systems that have been provided. So I think the Russians are there and they've told the Iranians, we will stand by you. But at the same time, I think Putin has always been predisposed to advise caution and restraint. Now, that's actually worked thus far very well, I would argue, in Ukraine. It is Ukraine that is dying. It is Ukraine that is bled to death. It's the American military establishment and its equipment that has failed miserably to successfully halt any Russian advance. But the situation in the Middle East is quite different. So giving that advice is probably not necessarily the right advice at this point. At the same time, you have Xi in China. He does not want the Straits of Hormuz to be closed, and he's worried about the destruction of the oil facilities in Iran and access to those straits.
You see what I'm saying? This dude just said Putin would be telling them the wrong advice. You can't be patient with the Israelis. Putin has had enough of that. That's why they struck. He told them to be patient, but now he's seen they was going to assassinate all the leaders, so they have no choice but to fight.
Straits. I mean, why would the Israelis allow business as usual through the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz if they're at war with Iran? I think it's pretty clear that they're not going to hold back. And that's why I'm saying that battle in Tehran is being fought out as we speak. And I don't know what the outcome will be, but I think ultimately the hardliners are going to win.
What has Netanyahu, who it is obvious now never wanted peace, exploited October 7th well beyond its initial meaning as an instrument with which to expand the borders of Israel well beyond, never mind 1967, but where it is today? What has he done to Israel by this belligerence, to the country that he leads?
Well, the Israeli economy is in ruins. There's no question about that. It'll take a long time to recover from all of this, but that's not terribly important as long as they swim in a sea of American cash. You know, if you look at the credit ratings in Israel, Israel's credit rating is tied to ours. We essentially underwrite Israeli economic strength, power, and stability. We underwrite their currency. We underwrite everything. So as long as this continues, I think the Israeli population is certainly 80+% behind what Mr. Netanyahu is doing. I don't think that is a reflection of whether they like him or not. That's another matter entirely. But I think what he's doing is something they strongly support. They want to rid themselves of the quote unquote Arab problem, the Palestinian Arab problem. They want to get rid of it. They want to rid themselves of the quote unquote Hezbollah problem. Now we can sit here, we can go back into the past and we can debate how it got this way and how the Israelis shot themselves in the foot several times, cultivated the emergence of their own enemies. It doesn't make any difference. This is what they want to do. And remember that if you can move into Lebanon, where they're headed now, you also exert considerable control over the water table and water resources. Water resources in that region of the world are as important as gold. And that would put them in a very strong position the deeper they go into Lebanon. And ultimately, their operations in Syria are the same. Again, this is why ultimately, and I say this ultimately, when all is said and done, we will watch Turks enter this conflict. The Turks will not sit there and do nothing in perpetuity. And we will see Jordan and Egypt explode. It's coming, but it's coming very slowly.
Will the Turks turn off the spigot of oil, much of which goes to Israel, or are they more interested in the commercial desirability of continuing to sell oil even to a country that's adverse to theirs?
The destruction of Lebanon, which is ongoing, is pushing them in the direction of shutting it down finally. And the pressure inside Turkey on President Erdogan and his regime, which is accused of all sorts of corruption problems right now, is enormous. I think he's going to be pushed into these actions, whether he likes it or not. And again, this is the street, if you will, the popular attitude in the Arab, Turkish, Persian world. What are we going to do? I mean, I'm sure you saw President Netanyahu talk about the Israelis liberating Iran from their oppressive government.
Yes.
And of course, that drew a lot of laughter inside Iran because the Iranians said, we may not like this government, but if you think we're going to align ourselves with the Jews in Israel against our own government, against our own country, you've lost your mind.
One wonders what that comment that he made was aimed at. Maybe it was Iranian expats living in the United States. But let me switch gears before we end. The killing of Nasrallah, a cultural icon, a religious leader, a cult leader, if you will, but is it very significant militarily that he's now dead?
I think it's significant militarily only insofar as it stiffens the resolve and the willingness to fight inside Hezbollah. Remember, his predecessor was also assassinated. The problem with all of these assassinations is that they do not fundamentally change anything. They tend on the whole to inspire those who don't want to negotiate in any case. It tends to discredit anybody who argues for moderation. It makes people in Israel and in the United States feel good because they've been able to find someone they don't like who is opposed to them and kill them. It also opens up another can of worms, which is what could happen to us and what could happen inside Israel. No one is immune to this sort of thing. When you start this assassination program, there's always a danger that it becomes a tit for tat operation. But it doesn't change anything strategically, because ultimately all of these people are replaced. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, what happens when you remove the CEO from General Electric or Chrysler or any of the big, automobile organizations, Ford or something else? Well, you replace them. Somebody else comes in and takes over. So you don't fundamentally change anything, but you do anger and you do inspire people to fight back.
And in this case, the replacement might be more strident than the person that was assassinated.
Well, we killed Soleimani. General Soleimani, and we don't need to go back over that. I thought that was a misguided act at the time, and thought it was also, as you would point out, unconstitutional, because we don't assassinate the members of other people's governments. Well, all of that went by the wayside. Has his force been any less effective? I don't see much evidence for that. Is Iran or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps any more willing to do business with us? Of course not. So killing him changed fundamentally nothing.
Colonel, thank you very much for your time, my dear friend.
You know, there's one last thing I'd like to say that people need to keep in mind. There are many ways to define genius. Both Goethe and Einstein said genius consists of knowing when to stop. The truth is that the Israelis are on the edge of the abyss, and we are with them, encouraging them to jump off the cliff and into the abyss. However good they may think things look at the moment, whatever advantage they think they've achieved is temporary. And over time, the massive enormity of opposition to them in the region is only going to metastasize and grow. So knowing when to stop is genius. I keep looking for it in Washington, in Kyiv, and in Jerusalem. I can't find it.
It doesn't exist. You're certainly not going to find it in Netanyahu. We know that.
The ballistic missile attacks by Iran on Israel has certainly exposed one thing, as if it wasn't exposed enough, which is the rampant, unashamed racism of Western political and media elites when it comes to Palestine and Israel, how Palestinians are dehumanized, how the worth of their lives is practically non-existent when it comes to those elites. That's been clear for a very long time. But there are moments when this racism is so naked, so shameless, so loud and proud, and this is one of them. Now, let's start with the official Israel Twitter account. And yes, it is deranged that a country has a troll Twitter account, appropriate in this case, and it posted video footage of the Iranian missiles in the Israeli night sky. The caption of Israel's official Twitter account was in capitals, "This isn't normal," followed by, "Every single one of these rockets is meant to kill." The "this isn't normal" is deeply revealing. What they mean there is missiles should only be raining down on the skies of Arab nations, not Israel. But what are the every single one of these rockets is meant to kill? What? Unlike Israeli rockets, which are, what? Tell me, please enlighten me. Are they designed to give their victims hugs and kisses? Now, look, when this was all happening, I had apologists for the Israeli state, a charming bunch at the best of times, in my mentions on Twitter, going, "Oh, I bet you love this. I bet you're cheering us on. I bet you couldn't enjoy this more," well, in slightly more colourful and abusive terms. I'll also use some colourful language. "No, you depraved bastards. You see, I'm on team don't bomb things. You're the people who cheer bombing people, and bombs you have cheered on a lot. A huge number of bombs you have been the cheerleaders for, which, unlike in this case, I would know, not a single Israeli civilian was killed, but you have cheered on bombs which have slaughtered tens of thousands, or indeed far more. Indeed, the captain of Team Bomb Things is Israel, which is responsible for the vast majority of bombings in the last year, slaughtering vast numbers of innocent people, many of them kids. I don't want anyone to bomb anyone. And some of us warned that continuing to do this, in the case of Israel, engaging in genocidal mayhem would only cause a military escalation, which people like myself oppose in all cases, while you line behind a state which literally has officially declared its strategy to be escalate to de-escalate. Now, let's take this other example, shall we, from the Conservative Party leadership candidate Tom Tugendhat, who tweets, "Iran's barbaric attack on Israel is a horrific escalation to this conflict. Tonight, more than ever, I will be praying for Israel." If barbaric is the correct term for this attack, which didn't kill a single Israeli civilian or soldier, and which was objectively actively directed at military targets, what word would we use to describe the mass slaughter of tens of thousands of people, including vast numbers of babies, toddlers, entire bloodlines wiped from the face of the earth, incinerated, terrified families blown apart in their cars, children shot in the head by snipers, most civilian infrastructure damaged or destroyed, so Gaza now looks a different color and texture when looked at from space. An entire population in Gaza deliberately starved by the Israeli state. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of 2 US government agencies who have officially declared it to be so. I could go on. If this was barbaric, then what words are used to describe the genocidal mayhem live streamed every single day? Now, Western leaders all publicly shared their horror, their fury, their condemnation. As the brilliant British commentator Rachel Shabby put it, anyone can see the double standard in the outpouring of sympathy from Western leaders for Israel after Iran's missile strike and the lack of similar compassion for Lebanese or Palestinian people under bombardment. Well, indeed, spot on. There is no subtlety at all about this racism, none at all. That an attack which kills no Israeli civilians received an outpouring of condemnation and solidarity, while all Palestinians get with the mass butchery of their people is some occasional feeble hand-wringing. Let's see one example, which I'm afraid is utterly infuriating. If your blood pressure is high, maybe look away. It is from the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer.
The Iranian regime has launched over 200 ballistic missiles at civilian targets in Israel. It's too soon to assess the impact fully, but I utterly condemn this attempt by the Iranian regime to harm innocent Israelis, to escalate this incredibly dangerous situation and push the region ever closer to the brink. It cannot be tolerated. We stand with Israel and we recognize her right to self-defense in the face of this aggression. Iran must stop these attacks, together with its proxies like Hezbollah. Iran has menaced the Middle East for far too long. Chaos and destruction brought not just to Israel, but to the people they live amongst in Lebanon and beyond. Make no mistake, Britain stands full square against such violence. We support Israel's reasonable demand for the security of its people.
That man, that shameless man, has not even shown 1% of the passion he showed there for tens of thousands of butchered Palestinians. No standing with Palestine, no sense whatsoever that Palestinians have a reasonable demand, as he puts it, for the security of their people without having their skulls ripped from their bodies, their babies cooked alive and the burning remnants of what was once their homes. No saying it cannot be tolerated when so many have been butchered. Israel is currently not just waging war against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank, it's invading Lebanon and bombing Syria. But no talk of Israel bringing chaos and destruction. Notice too how he keeps calling Israel her. Why that pronoun? Weird, creepy. Why is he doing this? He doesn't use that pronoun for other countries, as others have suggested, to portray Israel as some sort of damsel in distress, rather than a regional military superpower committing genocide, including the weapons and fighter jet components provided by the British government. And notice how he began his address by saying Israel has launched over 200 ballistic missiles at civilian targets, as author Alex Nuns and others flagged. That simply isn't true. As Alex Nuns tweeted, Israel has confirmed several Air Force bases were hit by Iran, while civilian damage was only minor and caused by shrapnel from interception missiles. It's clear that Starmer's team resorted to this lie because they think everyone will be too scared to be smeared as a stooge of the Iranian regime if they tell the truth. But this isn't about any apologism for the Iranian regime. It's the fact that Keir Starmer shows infinitely more solidarity here for fictional civilian targets than he does for the countless actual civilian targets destroyed so lethally by Israel. Again, this is racism. Starmer behaves very clearly as though Palestinian life does not matter to him, because we can see how he does behave when it comes to lives when he does deem them worthy, even when none of those lives has been taken. Oh, but just watch this. Watch this for an example of out of this world, shameless, racist double standards. Here is CNN.
The U.S. intel view that among the targets were Israeli airfields, but also, and this is crucial, the headquarters of Mossad, the international intelligence service of Israel, which is inside Tel Aviv. It's in the northern part of Tel Aviv, but it's in the city. It's in a densely populated area. And of course, the concern is if you're firing, even though Iran might consider that a military target, it is in a densely populated city with civilians around it. And that's just one more layer of escalation.
You cannot make this shit up. This CNN journalist is pointing out that Mossad's HQ is in a densely populated area with civilians around it. And that therefore, if Mossad's HQ is attacked, that's a threat to civilian life. I'm nearly speechless. We have spent the last year having mainstream media outlets constantly parroting the idea that Hamas, or indeed Hezbollah targets, are embedded in civilian areas, which constitutes using those civilians as human shields, justifying and rationalizing the mass slaughter of so many innocent people on the basis that military targets are near them, as if any military force on earth is just supposed to pop their headquarters on top of some deserted hill. Turns out no one does this, including the Israeli state, leading this CNN journalist to worry about potential harm to civilians if Mossad's headquarters was attacked. I feel like I'm going mad watching all of this. And I'm brutally aware that I'm a white guy who grew up in Stockport. I'm not a Palestinian. I'm not an Arab. I'm not a Muslim. If I feel like this, how are those with shared lived experiences with those facing this slaughter not going insane? And I read, of course, every day, the messages sent to me, as well as, of course, my friends, my comrades, what it's like watching this unfold. And I will just end on this. People like me don't want escalation. We just don't. We genuinely don't. We don't want any civilians to be killed, whoever they are. And the madmen who run Israel and their US patrons are determined to plunge the Middle East into a cataclysmic war in which so many lives are at stake. All because the US will not stop its client state, Israel, from committing genocide. But I think of how angry I feel. And I know that the West has sown a bitter harvest, and the reaping will have hideous consequences for generations to come.
Outcomes. Let's talk. We're going to talk about the potential outcomes. You know, one of the things that I've noticed, and I don't think it's an accident, is significantly less people on the live show now. I really think, and I get people constantly saying, we're not getting notified anymore. We're not getting notified anymore. We don't even know, you know, we don't even know you exist. So I think that's expected. That's why I ask everyone, please follow me on Rockfin, follow me on Rumble, because, you know, lately, for some reason, YouTube seems to have problems in executing their duties to notify the subscribers of particular channels that the hosts are coming on. So we will move forward. We will endeavor to persevere, right? Okay, so let's go. Where are we and what happened? Let's look at what happened. The Israelis have been, you know, on a rampage in the Middle East. And the latest of many things that they have done that could be quite upsetting to the resistance forces would be they went to Iran and they killed a guest of the Iranians, which last name's I always pronounce it Haniyeh. They attacked the leadership of Hezbollah, which is both a political and a military group. They, of course, the ongoing slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank, etc. And of course, they've been attacking Lebanon lately and killing civilians. So the Iranians finally said, okay, you know, we've basically, as my mother would say, I've talked to you and talked to you and talked to you until I'm blue in the face, and I'm done talking to you. I don't know why I was always blue in the face. My mother was actually a very red-colored woman, but for some reason, when she finished talking to me, she was always blue in the face. But at any rate, they felt the need to take military action. Here's something that's interesting. I talked to a friend of mine and I said, yeah, and they were saying, yeah, did you hear what happened? I'm like, what? I was watching the news, and as soon as I heard I was watching the news, I thought, okay, this is going to go bad, right? And apparently the Iranians tried to fire some missiles at Israel, but the Israelis blocked it. I'm like, is that what you heard? Yes. And I'm like, well, you might want to look at these videos. And I showed some videos online, missiles crashing out of the sky, blowing up all over the hell, people diving for, rolling, diving for their lives, hiding, screaming, yelling, cheering in some areas, right? So it seemed pretty apparent that there was, in fact, a missile strike in Israel. Afterwards, my first thought was, well, the immediate inclination of the U.S. empire is to say nothing happened, nothing to see here, move along. No, nobody, the missiles didn't even strike, nobody got hurt, right? That was their immediate inclination, is just to simply say it didn't happen. And which is like, gaslighting. That's what narcissists do. That's what sociopaths do. They gaslight people. They hit you in the head. Wham! And you say, hey, you hit me in the head. And they say, I didn't hit you. I don't know what you're talking about, right? Gaslighting, denial, never happened. Right. So I took that into account. Like, okay, so their first immediate move was to gaslight, right? Here's something that's interesting. I read an article this morning, just some of the responses that said the Israelis say that Iran has crossed all red lines. And I thought, okay, let's see. According to the Lancet, you've killed probably over 200,000 people. They said about 3 months ago, 186,000 people had been killed, civilians in the Gaza. You have bombed Iran. The Israelis have bombed Yemen. The Israelis have bombed Syria. The Israelis have bombed Lebanon. They have bombed occupied Palestine. They have used communications devices in what has been interpreted by many as a pager, as a terrorist attack. Yet, the Iranians are the ones that have crossed all red lines, right? What is that about? Let me first start by addressing that, because I think this is an important part of the conversation. And the term is impunity, right? The belief by the Israelis is in the rules-based international order, as is often discussed by Blinken, right? Somebody said the bully cries foul. Exactly. What does that mean? It's quite simple. That means I would advise someone to read up on narcissism, what the narcissist does. This is pure narcissism, the rules-based international order. If you study narcissism, I read a lot of love. I really thought psychology was interesting and the way the brain works. So I read a lot of books on that stuff and narcissism and all that kind of stuff. And what you find is this, that a person who is in a relationship with a narcissist quickly finds this: the rules for thee and not for me, right? I can do whatever I want. I can yell at you, you jerk. And the next day, if you yell at me, hey, why'd you call me a jerk? Oh, you yelled at me. That's unacceptable. Oh my God, I can't believe you acted like that. And you're sitting there like, you just yelled at me 5 minutes ago. Their perspective is one of superiority. The rules don't apply to me. That's the way a narcissist sees. I can do whatever I want to you. I am superior to you. The rules don't apply to me. I am a god. I am a king, and you're a subject, right? And I can do whatever I want. So Israel's perspective is, and as Tony Blinken always says, the rules-based international order, the empire, the imperialist, whatever you want, the narcissist, whatever term you want to use, it always comes back to the same thing. And people have many of us have dealt with people like that in our lives. Could be a friend, a family member, a job, a significant other, whatever. But many of us have seen that dynamic. Most people have dealt with someone where someone feels like they can do whatever they want. They can act with impunity. And if you respond, if you even say, hey, I don't think you should have done that, they act with outrage. You have no right. You have no justification to speak against the Holy One, which of course is me in the instance of a narcissist, right? Now, Israel, as I always say, there are people that don't want to accept it. I don't care if you accept it or not. This is my perspective. So Israel is not a country. Israel is an extension of the U.S. empire. It is critical to the US empire to control the oil, the flow of oil, to be able to stop or start the flow of oil, to be able to have great control over the Middle East where all that oil is. That's the US empire. It's critical. And one of the methods, in fact, the principal method that it uses for that is having a military and an intelligence presence in the Middle East in the form of Fort Israel. It is a US political, military, and intelligence tool in the sea of oil that is the Middle East. The Israelis take the bargain. Sure, we'll be that in return for being able to be an extension of the empire. If we can be an extension of the empire, if we can exercise the rules-based order, if we can exercise the same dominance in this region as that the empire exercises worldwide, we're fine. We'll be the regional US empire. So yes, do they put themselves in a position of being a target? Yes, but their feeling is this: we can do whatever we want to. So who cares if we're a target? We are the US empire. Uncle Sam is ours. We are, so we does the question always arises: does the US run Israel, or does Israel run the US? Well, okay, do I run this hand, or this hand runs me? Do I run my heart, or does my heart run me? Do I run my brain, or does my brain run me? I can, using words, separate my brain from the rest of my body. I mean, my hand, my brain. Listen to me. I don't have a brain, apparently. If I think this is my brain, I can separate my hand from the rest of my body using words. Hey, this is a hand. Using words, it's a hand. But in reality, there is no separation. I can separate Israel from the US empire by calling it Israel. If I don't call it Israel, there is no real separation. Is Israel right now, they got no economy, do they? They have no economy, but they're still surviving. Why? Because they're living off US money. In the same way that the blood flows out of the rest of my body and keeps this hand going. This hand can't go without the blood. I'll put it like this. If you put a rope around here, a tourniquet, and cut this off, it stops the blood. And this hand dies because this hand can't survive without getting the blood, without getting all of the things that it needs, the nutrients that it needs, without getting the chemicals that my brain release and say, well, my one nerve has told me I've got a cut in this hand. The brain then sees that and says, oh, I better send this and that to that cut to repair it. I better make a scar, I better make a scab there and coagulate the blood, blah, 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 blah. This brain and the rest of my body keeps this hand going, but the hand can't go. You cut this hand off, it dies immediately. It can't make it, right? Perfect example, one of the problems that the Israelis having economically, what is that? The Houthis are applying a tourniquet in the Red Sea. Hey, you're going to have trouble. They have restricted the flow of blood to this hand. So the hand's starting to get sick and die, right? They've restricted the flow of goods to Israel. So Israel start economically sick. We got to find another way to get blood to them, to get money, to get food, etc. Right? So that's my point being that the only way you can separate Israel from the United States is using words, because in the real world, there is no separation whatsoever. Israel knows it. The US empire knows it. The only people that don't know it are the people that get involved in this discussion, that they're going to use words to divide the people that say, well, that's the leg of a cat, the ear of a cat, the tail of a cat, the nose of a cat, the fur of a cat. Not realizing that all they're talking about is a cat. But utilizing words, we can cut that cat up into we can never stop. That's the cat's ear, nose, and keep going. Well, there we go. There's the skin of the cat and the blah. But no, there's the tail of the cat, the paw of a cat, leg of a cat. We can separate that cat into pieces for hours using words. But in the reality of in the realm of reality, the words separate the cat, but the cat's gonna walk out the room because it's only one cat. And the same with Israel. We can argue forever over who's running who and what's what, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, Israel is the United States, and the United States is Israel. And they know it if you don't, right? So here, part of the evidence is Israel, the U.S. is suffering, is going through hell, going through whatever, dealing with all kind of issues because of Israel. Internal politics. The Democrats look like they may very well lose because of Israel. But I may very well go down and die trying to save this hand because I want my hand cut off. I'm going to fight like hell the rest of my body trying to save this hand. I don't lose my hand, and they understand that. And as an empire, it basically what the Democratic Party is doing. I hate to keep using metaphors and analogy, but let me do it. Let me do another one. Why? So why would the Democrats? My God, they're going to lose. They'll lose literally before they will, turn on Israel or try to reign in Israel. Give me another. I love to use analogies, so forgive me if it bugs you. It's just who I am. Watched a Alien versus Predator, and the big alien, the major queen alien, right? She was all tied up, and she had metal shackles all over her, right? But the little aliens, her little minions, you might say, were running all over the place. Well, if you understand aliens, you understand that their blood is acid, and if you cut them open, their acid will burn through anything, right? So what did the queen alien do with all the little aliens? All this metal's around her, right? A bunch of the little aliens lined up on the metal, and the other aliens killed them, poked holes all in them, and the alien acid blood drained onto the metal shackles that were holding her, burned that away with acid, and she was freed. So what did these little minion aliens do? They sacrificed themselves for the queen alien, right? Because she was the big cause, right? So Democrats are minion aliens, and they understand it. The Democrats are simply saying, look, Israel is that's the big queen of the empire. That is the jewel of the empire. They see that as the fact. Why is it that Israel, that they love, is it because Jewish people? I don't know if you've checked the history of the West, but the history of the West has never been friendly to Jewish people. The history of the West is a centuries long, maybe thousands of millennia long cacophony of anti-Semitism. That happened I mean, look at the history of the European culture. It's been killing and murdering and slaughtering Jews. In fact, you can argue that Israel is the banishment of Jewish people from Europe to another part of the world. Get out of here. That's the way they work. Get out of here, Jewish people. You'll be a lot safer if you're way over there away from us, right? So it isn't about the people being Jewish. It's about there's where the oil is, and it's important. If we're going to remain an empire and a world hegemon, it is critical, first and foremost, that oil, we maintain control of it. That's what it's about. Now, you can argue then that as a result of that, a lot of very powerful Zionists, both Jewish and non-Jewish, probably mostly Jewish, but billionaire Zionists, then got extraordinary influence in U.S. politics, and there you go. That's a whole nother discussion. But the foundation of the support of Israel is U.S. empire, U.S. imperialism, maintaining a chokehold on that oil. Okay, let us continue. So the Democrats then look at this and say, look, we're minions. If you come to us and you say, we got to keep Israel, we got to keep the queen, we got to keep the jewel, little minion, yeah, sacrifice yourself. The Democrats are like, yeah, they understand the rules. Sure, you're going to have to lose. But you're going to have to lose to keep Israel as part of the empire. Problem. Let's not forget, Nancy Pelosi gave away the store, man. Nancy Pelosi said what? See, they said, Nancy Pelosi said, even if the Capitol crumbles and all falls apart around us, we'll support Israel. Why? Why is that? Because she understood that in order for the U.S. to be the world hegemon, which it's not really anymore, but to try to hold on to hegemony, there's no way to do that without maintaining that powerful presence in the Middle East. Do they have other bases in the Middle East? Sure. They got other bases. Nothing like Israel. Nothing like it. They got bases in the Middle East, but nothing like Israel. That is a country. It works with them. A country, in the same way that they launder money through crypto and other things, they launder intelligence and militarism and what have you through Israel. And they also use that for their evil machinations to try to control the resources of Africa. Israel is critical to the U.S. remaining an empire at the center, and both parties, well, they don't care if they lose because their perspective is this: well, even if we lose, we still got Israel, which means this. Here's the thing about it, but I always use this. I once knew a guy that was in the mafia. I've told this story before, and as a result of being in the mafia, he got caught and he wouldn't talk. And he went to jail, and when he came out, the mafia richly rewarded him, gave him a new house, all kinds of stuff, right? Richly rewarded him. Why? Because he made a sacrifice for the team. The Democrats know if they lose, it doesn't matter. There's plenty of billionaire Zionists that will out there that will reward them. The entire empire will reward. All of those who lost will be richly rewarded for losing. So they ain't going to lose nothing. How are you going to lose if as soon as, oh, wow, you lost your seat in the House, you lost the White House, whatever. What do we get? Here's a job for $10 million a year. Thank you. So they even even if they, I like to say, even if they lose, they win. The Democrats will not lose. Personally and individually, they ain't going to lose. Let's continue. So all that platform I set, that foundation, let's go back based on all of that. Now let's return to the Israeli Iranian issue. So a couple of things have happened. Let me just tell you something that I heard on more than one occasion from various. I heard Andrei Martyanov say it, and I had heard this before from some of my intel, as they say, sources, and that was, you know, the Israelis have something called, they've got David Sling, they call it, and the Iron Dome and all that kind of stuff, and people are like Iron Dome, David Sling. They are simply, they take the Patriot missile system or some other U.S. missile system, right? And they give it some, you know, Old Testament name. That's all it is. I could take this coffee and give it an Old Testament name, right? That's David Sling coffee. It's a friggin' cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts. Okay, so the reality is the Israelis, all of that stuff that they have with names, it's just Patriots or whatever the case may be. But one of the things that I had heard was that when Ansar Allah, the Yemen fighters, you know, they've been striking Israel recently with hypersonic missiles. And again, I think that was kind of a brushback. They were sending missiles in using hypersonic missiles. And I think it was a way that the Iranians and the resistance was able to demonstrate to the Israelis, look, man, we can just give the Houthis here can fire a couple of missiles, one, and get through. You can't even stop one. How do you think you're going to stop the rest? Come on, chill out, right? It was a message to them. But my understanding is that they struck, I don't know if it was David Sling or if it was the Iron Dome elements of that, but the bottom line was that one of the missiles that was fired by the Yemenis had struck the Israeli air defense system that they took out, like a David Sling or, you know, one of these Patriot systems. They took out, sending in one missile got through U.S. the phalanx of U.S. and NATO ships and everything, all trying to stop missiles, all lined up to protect Israel. One missile got through. Not only did it get through, it was aimed at part of the Israeli air defense system, and it hit it. Right. So the message was clear. Come on, if Yemen can throw a missile in and hit whatever they want, come on, you're very vulnerable. Let's not fool ourselves. Okay. But I do think to some extent the US empire and the Israelis felt that, well, yes, we are quite vulnerable, but they won't do it. Don't you know who I am? I mean, haven't you heard of like stars and athletes when somebody tries to hold them to accountable and says, sorry, sir, you can't come in here. I'm sorry, this area is closed. Don't you know who I am? I'm the star of such and such movies. I play for, you know, whatever, the Boston Bruins, whatever the case may be, right? That don't you know who I am? Again, that narcissism. And it was, yeah, sure, they got a missile in here and there, but the Iranians would dare strike the US empire. Don't they know who we are? I think you have to understand the culture of Iran. You have to understand Shia Islam to understand where they're coming from, right? It is they believe that the way they're acting is part of their religious duty. So what happened was, after all of the things that were happened, that the Iranians and the resistance forces believed to be unacceptable transgressions, crossing of red lines, the Iranians said, "Okay, you've gone too far." Now, last April, the Iranians, using some of their older drones and older missiles, and one or two of the new ones, overwhelmed the Israeli and the U.S. and NATO air defense systems, and struck Israel with a brushback hit. They hit them with several missiles, and they let them know, look, we got your number. If we want to hit you, we can. And look, that's our old stuff that we took out of the closet. We looked and found some old drones and missiles around and just threw them at you, and you couldn't stop them. You don't want the newer stuff. You don't want that. And we don't want to do it. So don't push us too far. Well, of course, it's Israel. It's the U.S. empire. So they do all of this stuff. And ultimately, the Iranians finally say, okay, well, we told you that you were going to go too far. If you went too far, we'd hit. And so they fired what appears to be, I've heard numbers from 100 to 500. I'm going to go with 200. And the reason is because I've seen that more than once in the Russian media. And I know that the Russians and the Iranians have a very close relationship. I do know that apparently in the middle of the night before this incident occurred, that the Russian leader, President Putin, apparently rushed to the Kremlin in the middle of the night and had some kind of a meeting. And I suspect that, and I also read that the Iranians did notify the Russians. So I imagine there was a call made, hey, we're going to punch the U.S. empire in the mouth. And of course, the Russians then met to determine, because you know how they are. If you know anything about the Russians, right? I always say they look both ways before crossing a one-way street, right? They're going to map it out. This is what may happen. Here's the possibilities. If it happened, we does this. What are our responses, etc. Right? And so that's the nature, of the Russian culture. They sat down and mapped things out very mechanically and logically, right? But at any rate, so approximately 200 missiles were fired. Now, what have we heard? We've heard numbers anywhere from 20 to I'll put it like this: numbers from 10% to 90% of the missiles were knocked down, right? So I've heard 20. To be safe, in my opinion, a safe figure is going to be 90% of the missiles 80% of the missiles will go through. I think that it's probably higher, but I'm going to go with a safe figure of 80% of 200 missiles, which would put us at 160 missiles striking. Now, we can go online and we can find, you can simply go all over the place, whether it's Telegram or X or wherever, lots of places, but not just that, all over the place. And you can find videos of massive numbers of missiles striking. So the idea that they were all shot down, or most of them were shot down, is not plausible, realistically. And hypersonic missiles were used. The number of missiles just seemed to make it clear that the system was overwhelmed. The air defense system of Israel in the U.S., NATO was overwhelmed, and numerous targets were struck. So that's where we are. Okay. I would imagine a couple of things. That one of the first things that has to happen after look, if a military entity attacks another military entity, right? If they drop a bomb, if they say this is a target we need to hit, and they drop a bomb, one of the critical things that needs to happen is they need some reconnaissance to figure out how much damage was done. For one thing, if a military drops a bomb, if they say that's a target and we want to bomb it, and they bomb the target, they want to know, should they bomb it again? Was everything destroyed? How much damage? It's critical to understand how much damage was done by the enemy. So I would imagine as the sun came up in Israel, one of the first things that the U.S. and Israel wanted to do, excuse me, I think I got a stinking coffee on my thing. One of the first things that the U.S. and Israel wanted to do was figure out how much damage was done, was to look over. I'm guessing a lot. My understanding is at minimum, two very important bases were struck by a lot of missiles, which means these bases were probably mostly obliterated, right? I read that the Iranians are claiming, don't know that it's true, can't say that it is or isn't. The Iranians are claiming that, now, let me first say this. One of the bases was known to house F-35 fighters. That the Iranians claim that they took out a minimum of 20 F-35 fighters at one of the bases. I don't know. Did the U.S. and Israel have time to move some of the stuff that they thought would get hit? It's possible. I would suspect that they had, I know they had some time. I know there was some apparently evidence that Iran was prepping an attack. That, you know, it was an open secret. A lot of people knew, you know, a bit of time beforehand that Iran was prepping an attack. So I would imagine that they tried to figure out which bases would get hit, which was the most important, where were the most important things that they had, and maybe try to move them, right? But at any rate, some bases probably were, I think the bases that were targeted were probably pretty much obliterated. Right. So not only, think about this, not only did they strike Israel, if you hit a couple of bases, Israel isn't a big country, they don't have but so many bases. So if they got a couple of bases obliterated that need to be rebuilt, they actually had critical damage to their military infrastructure. Very important damage to their military infrastructure. Now, one of the response was from Israel went like this. First response that I saw was, we will bomb, and tonight we will go out and we will attack military targets throughout the Middle East in a response, number one. The second thing that I saw from the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, whatever they are, some people call it the Israeli Offensive Forces, the IOF. I don't care. You know, I've heard all kinds of things being called, you know, names, but whatever, the Israeli military. So it's, we're going to attack. Then next was, we will attack at a time and place of our choosing. The last thing that I've read was the Israelis have said, we are going to, we will respond, you know, with a powerful response. And apparently the U.S., something about Jake Sullivan saying, we're working with the Israelis to determine our response. And, you know, it will be a strong response. That being said, the Iranians have answered and said, look, we're not afraid of war. We'll do what we have to do. Now, keep in mind, they have said, and I believe it, the Iranians have said, look, we're going to hit Israel. You've done all kinds of dastardly deeds, and we're going to hit you, and we're going to punch you pretty good, and we're going to consider the matter closed. However, if you strike back, we'll strike back even more destructive. They've said you can expect your infrastructure to be hit, right? You can decimate it. They're saying to Israel, look, we're not afraid, number one. Number two, if you hit us back, we're going to punch you harder every single time. Additionally, the Iranians have said if anyone in the region helps them, their bases will be hit too. And that includes the United States. So the Iranians have said, look, we don't want trouble, but we will escalate as you escalate. As they used to say, when I used to teach in the police academy, the law basically is this: proportionate response. If you hit me with a chicken feather, I can hit you with a turkey feather. That's the continuum of response, right? I can up it a little bit better. And I think that's that's what I interpret the Iranians to be saying. Every time you hit us this much, we'll up it. You hit us again, we're going to keep increasing. How many punches can you take? Now, immediately we must go to the elephant in the room. But it ain't exactly an elephant in a room. Let's be honest. It's a blue whale in a telephone booth, right? The most obvious question. and that is the Israelis have nuclear weapons. Will they immediately go to nuclear weapons? At some point, will they up it to nuclear weapons? Let me address that a couple of times by a couple of different things that I've heard. Number one, and I go by what Andrei Martyanov has said, and I think he's a brilliant guy. He knows his stuff, and he has said, look, I think it's like 1,000 or 1,200 kilometers, something like that, is the closest distance between the Israelis, Israel and Iran. So if Israel decides to strike Iran, then they got a long punch. They can't very well send in forces or anything, right? Number one, they're not big enough. They don't have the numbers. Number two, how are you going to send forces that long to fight? They'll be overwhelmed and destroyed immediately. How many forces can you send to Iran, right? So other than, some kind of a terrorist type asymmetric attack or some kind of missiles or whatever, Israel doesn't have a lot of options as Israel, not as the US, right? And as far as nuclear weapons, Scott Ritter has said, and I believe him, look, and I believe him, let's face it, the Iranians are a high-tech society. We're not talking about, the Afghan leadership or some more struggling low-tech country or group. According to Scott Ritter, look, he's basically, look, if the Iranians wanted nukes, they could get them real quick. They already have the delivery methods, obviously. It wouldn't take long, like days, if they don't already have them. I have heard rumors from Russians, that the Iranians have, quote, undeclared weapons that are very powerful. So in my opinion, the Iranians could have nuclear weapons, or if they don't have nuclear weapons now, they could have them in days, hours, weeks, a week, whatever the case may be. So Israel would be taking chances to use nuclear weapons. Number two, that could, nuclear fallout could drop all, if they use nuclear weapons, could drop all over the Middle East, all over the oil fields, you name it, even come back to Israel, right? So what they may be doing is wiping out all the oil fields themselves, and with it, the entire Western economy, to absolute economic suicide. And let's face it, if the United States economy, as I said with my hand, if you put a tourniquet around my hand, around my wrist, my hand dies because it can't get blood, right? But if you shoot me in the head, my hand also dies. So if the Israelis were to do something that would wipe out the Western economy, they get no money from the U.S., the Western economy being the U.S., they get no more support from the U.S. Guess what happens? Israel dies. So to some extent, they would be risking suicide. They'd be playing Russian roulette to do that. Will they do that? Will the U.S. let them do it? That's the question. Number one, there's a number of instances where that, in fact, here is the case, that dynamic remains. And so to go forward with that, additionally, Alistair Crook, another guy who I respect a lot, has said that, look, the Iranians have in the mountains, in bunkers that are way beneath the rocks and spread there all over the place. They have bases with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of missiles, and that their game plan would be if it got taken to the level of a nuclear attack by Israel, that the people in those bunkers would be told, fire all your missiles on Israel until they stop hundreds of thousands of them, turn Israel into a parking lot, right? Now, and let me add this, they got a nuclear power plant in Israel. Don't you think that'd be, if they struck with a nuclear weapon, don't you think that's the first thing that would be targeted, in my opinion, in numerous ways? For Israel to use nuclear weapons would be the end of Israel, and quite likely that's it for the U.S. empire. That, it would be suicide for the U.S. empire. So will they do it? It is possible, but I don't think it's very likely that they would do it. Now, additionally, notwithstanding the discussion of nuclear weapons being a critical part of the discussion, the other part of the discussion, which is certainly inextricably linked, is the issue of oil coming out of the region, period, right? So in the event that the U.S. is involved in an attack on Iran, and how can Israel do this without the U.S. being involved in the attack on Iran? If that happens, the Iranians have said we'll strike U.S. bases, and I believe they will. I believe they will. They'll hit U.S. bases. So now what happens? The U.S. now is in an instance where, and keep in mind, I've talked about this. The U.S. is an empire. Empires do two things. They expand, such as, hey, we're going to take Ukraine. We're going to expand up to Russia's border. When you talk about the expansion of NATO, you're talking about the imperial expansion, the expansion of the U.S. empire. And one of the things they said was, well, you think you're going to stop us in Ukraine? We'll go in Finland and Sweden. What were they saying? You're going to try to stop the expansion of the empire. You're going to try to contract the empire by taking Ukraine from us. We took Ukraine. It was ours. We overthrew the government. We started building bases. We expanded up to your border in Ukraine. Russia said, no, you ain't. We're kicking you out, which means the empire now contracts. So the empire said, no, we can't contract. We'll take Finland and Sweden then. So if we're going to get smaller over here, we got to get bigger over there. They looked at it and they know they can't hold Ukraine from Russia if Russia really wants it. So they said, my God, we'll be contracting. We can't do that. We got to expand. All right, we'll take Finland and Sweden. And now that's a fair trade-off. We haven't contracted. We've actually expanded. And what did Stoltenberg say? Yes, you thought you were going to get less NATO when you got more NATO. In other words, this simp for his masters in DC said, you thought the empire was going to contract? We're expanding. Ha ha ha. The empire's not dead. Because if an empire is contracting, it's dying. If it's expanding, the only way it can remain an empire is to continue to expand. Part of being an empire is expanding, taking more and more and more and more and more. If you ain't expanding, if you're staying the same, you're not an empire. If you're staying the same while other world powers grow. You see, Russia's growing, China's growing, Iran's growing, all these other countries are growing. If you stay the same while they grow, you lose. You got to continue to expand as these other powers grow so you can try to knock them down. So we go on. If the U.S. puts themselves in a position where Iran starts smacking into U.S. bases, now the U.S. is, again, losing bases, it's contracting. So they don't want to do that. So there's probably some fear of losing bases. There's probably also a fear that if this breaks out, the flow of oil out of the Middle East will be restricted, right? But keep in mind something. The U.S. doesn't mind if it's restricted as long as they're in charge of it. One part of, believe you me, part of the U.S.'s plan to destroy and take out China, and with it the entire world economy. That's a whole nother video. The U.S. does, if they destroy China, will they destroy the world economy? Yes, they will. Is that what they want to do? Yes, it's what they want to do. Why? They're $35 trillion in debt and they can never pay that debt. What is their options? Well, we can never pay this debt and we're going to go broke. What can we do? We can wipe out the world economy and do a reset and start all over again. That's our only option. That is, in fact, their plan. So let's continue. So now they're in a spot. They're in a tight spot because they got decisions to make. They're at that edge. If we push Iran too far, then Iran starts hitting our bases, and then what? Then the U.S. has to come into it themselves, right? Their bases are hit. It's no longer Israel. Now, the U.S. is already in it, but just like Ukraine, they have to maintain what they consider plausible deniability, right? As I always say, you watch a movie, at the beginning of the movie, you see a hand and you see a black fingers, a glove being put on that hand. You know that a crime is going to be committed. You know you're looking at the criminal, and you know that criminal is putting that glove on, so he won't leave his fingerprints at the crime scene. Plausible deniability. I wasn't there. What? My fingerprints aren't at that crime scene. My DNA, nothing's there. I wasn't there. All the evidence in the world points to you being there, but they can't put you at the crime scene, so you walk. They can't charge you, right? Well, in Ukraine, plausible deniability. They're on that edge, right? It's not us. It's not us. It's not us. It's Russia. We're protecting a democratic, dear, sweet, poor little innocent Ukraine, right? Not us. It's a proxy war. But now they're on that edge in both proxy wars because now Ukraine's crapping out. Ukraine wants to basically, Ukraine, and this is all part of the same discussion. Ukraine wants the U.S. to have its personnel and England to use its personnel to fire weapons deep into Russia. That wouldn't be Ukraine, it would be Russia. So what Russia is saying is the plausibility part of your plausible deniability, we'll play along with that. We'll play along with that because it works for all of us. Okay, it ain't you. It's the Ukrainians. You're giving the Ukrainian stuff and they're firing it at us. We know it's you, you know it's you, but for the purposes, it's easier for everybody if we just pretend that your deniability is plausible. What the Russians have said is, look, if these missiles are fired at us, if you fire this weapon at us, we know, the world knows that Ukraine can't fire those missiles, that you can fire the missiles. The plausible part of your plausible deniability is gone. And it's clear now that you are at war with us, that you have decided, and they knew it would always come to this. And this is all part of the discussion. I'm not getting away from the Iranian discussion. What Russia is saying is, you have decided that it's getting to the point that Ukraine is losing and you're going to step in. That you've said that we always told you, look, if you come in, it's on. As long as you work to maintain some level of plausible deniability, we'll play along with you. As long as that happens, you come in here and step in, and you go over that Rubicon, over that red line, where now you're not even playing plausible deniability in it. You're saying, okay, we're going to come in and we'll fire the missiles at you. Russia's saying, if that's the case, then it's on. If you aren't even trying to pretend anymore, you're going to get punched in the mouth hard. The game's going to get changed. Is the deniability plausible or implausible? It's up to you. Well, interestingly enough, because I always say Ukraine and Gaza and Israel is the same war on different fronts. The different fronts of the same war, identical in every way, except they're just two different fronts of the U.S. world on the war on the entire world, the neocon U.S. war on the imperialist war on the entire world. Okay, let us continue. So that's the line between plausible versus implausible deniability of direct involvement in the conflict. They're right at that line in Ukraine, and they're also right at that line in Israel, because Iran's saying, look, we already know what the U.S. has claimed so far is Israel's making decisions on their own. And at times we tell them not to do something and they do it. That's part of the plausible deniability argument. Everybody knows otherwise, but people are playing along with them. Oh, yeah, sure, Israel's on their own. You're not making any decisions. You're telling them not to do it and they're not listening to you, right? Oh, we told them not to bomb Hezbollah, blah, but all you got to do is start searching really quick, and you'll find that article in Politico yesterday where they said the United States quietly agreed and supports Israel with their attack on Hezbollah and taking out the leaders and all. They quietly, right? So they're on that edge right now. And Iran is saying the same exact thing that Russia is saying. Look, we'll play with the plausible deniability game. We fire a missile at Israel and you guys try to block it, try to intercept it. And what you're saying is we're not involved. We're just involved in the defense of Israel. And Iran knows you're involved in everything. The pagers, come on, get out of here with that, right? But we'll play along with you as long as there is some plausibility to it, as long as there's enough that we can pretend that it ain't really you. But Iran's now saying the same thing. This is where this inevitably led to the edge, that edge between plausible versus implausible deniability that both sides would play along with. So now the big part of it is Israel, look, they got the crap smacked out of them. And you know what? They can't keep taking those kind of punches, because if Iranian says you just lost 2 bases, we turn them into crap. Next time you're going to lose 2. Next time maybe you'll lose 3 bases. How many bases does Israel have before they run out of bases? How many air bases do they have? How many ports do they have before they run out? They ain't going to take a whole lot of punches before they become unable to function as a competent military, right? Iran's got plenty of missiles, and they're always going to get through. Now, the U.S. now has to decide, do we, weeks before an election, do we get involved in damn World War III in the Middle East? Is that what we want weeks before an election? That's something to think about, not just the questions and philosophical and political and military questions that are raised, but the political situation at home, weeks before an election. Do we take a chance? What happens if Iran says, look, we ain't going to hit 1 or 2 bases? You don't know what they're saying. Will Iran hit 1 or 2 American bases? Or will Iran just say, you know what? We ain't playing around with you. If you hit us, all your bases are gone, every last one of them. Iran, they may say, look, we have to cripple you. We know if we hit you, look, I know if I punch you, it'll just make you mad and you'll beat me up. So I got to cripple you so that even if you want to beat me up, I'm going to make it hard to do. If I were Iran, I'd say, look, every base within my reach, within my region, I'm turning it into rubble. Every last one of them. And there's nothing you can do to stop me. If you attack me, the US, yes, can you attack me again? Yes, you can, but it ain't going to be easy. Number one. Number two, Iran has 2 options. They can do a proportional strike. Let's say the US is involved. Iran can do a proportional strike. Okay, you bombed one of our ports, we'll bomb one of your bases. Or Iran can say what a martial artist, what is a martial artist going to do? What is a person who knows self-defense going to do if you swing at them? Are they going to give you one little punch? Boink. And wait and see what happens? No, they are not. They're going to throw punches, fists, chops, elbows, everything until you are on the ground. They're going to say it's a fight. And a fight means that I have to obliterate my enemy. I have to put my enemy in a position where they can't. So it's like, I don't want any trouble. I don't want any trouble. But if you swing, it is on. And I ain't going to stop swinging until you are a bloody, broken pulp laying on the ground, or I'm a bloody, broken pulp laying on the ground. Somebody's going down. I'm not going to have to run away from this fight. I'm going to walk away because you're going to be laying on the ground beaten to a pulp. That's the way a person who's trained in self-defense thinks, right? You strike me and there's no, oh, I'm going to throw a couple punches. It's, oh, everything I got's coming. So you decide you want to fight. It's biting, it's scratching, it's striking the groin, it's poking the eyes, it's anything I can, if I can pick something up and bop you in the head with it, whatever I can do to hurt you, I'm doing, because I got to put you down, right? So Iran could very well say, if the U.S. hits me, I'm taking out all their bases. Not just in an act of revenge, but an act of self-defense that says, if you hit me, I'll hit you with everything I got to make sure. They get all of those U.S. ships in the region. Iran could say they're all gone. All your bases are gone, all your ships are gone, everything. If you hit me, you're going to take the nastiest punch you ever took. I'm going to annihilate all of your resources with everything I got in the region. So before you think about punching me again, you have to make a real strong consideration of what you're going to punch me with. You hit first, I warned you. So Iran has options, and the U.S. has to think about that. Iran has also said what? If this thing goes ugly, I'll wipe out all of the infrastructure of the oil infrastructure. So what if Iran says, okay, now what you're going to do? Your bases are all gone. Next goes the oil infrastructure. And that's it for your economies. I will destroy the Western economy. So Iran has nuclear options without nuclear weapons. And who's to say they don't have them? And even if they don't, they could. And even if they don't, what happens if Israel strikes them with a nuclear weapon or something? And Russia says, and Iran says, oh, interesting. You have a nuclear power plant, don't you? We're going to put 50 missiles in that and vaporize that nuclear power plant right in the middle of Israel. We're going to turn it into Chernobyl. How's that going to work, Israel? How's a small country like Israel going to continue to survive when a significant portion of that country is uninhabitable? So we don't have to nuke you. We can make you nuke yourselves. So they're really taking some serious chances. Now, let me add this in case you didn't know. The Russians have bases. They have a in Syria, the Russians have an air base. The Russians have a Navy base in Syria. So the other issue is, could the Russian bases be in peril? That would cause the Russians to react. The Chinese have a base in on the Red Sea, Djibouti. Always screw that up. I don't know how DJ is pronounced. Djibouti, whatever. Yo booty, I don't know how, but whatever. All jokes aside, so that could be put in peril. The Russians and the Chinese both could look at Iran, the axis of resistance, as an ally, and say we're going to defend our ally. There are other considerations. The U.S. is pissing everybody off. So if the U.S. gets tangled up in the Middle East, the Russians could then say, well, what a perfect time to finish off Ukraine, launch a massive offensive and wipe out Ukraine. Or they could say to the Ukrainians, okay, you got 24 hours to surrender everything. Otherwise, it's it for you. Now, what is the U.S. going to do if they're all tangled up in the Middle East? Well, God darn you, we'll come over and, oh, crap, that's right. And might I add, there's a little issue with Taiwan. So the Chinese could simply say to Taiwan, what happens if the Russians say to Ukraine, you got 24 hours to surrender or it's curtains for your ass? And at the same time, the Chinese surround Taiwan again with another one of their armadas of ships and say, you know, Taiwan, we've been talking to you until we were collectively blue in the face. But we've been talking to you, and you want to be hard-headed. You got taking missiles from the U.S. You're talking all kind of separatist and independent stuff. Everybody knows you're part of China. We know it, and you know it. Might be a time to settle up on this thing, huh? Let's sit down and have a talk. Or we can do this the hard way. Would you like to do this the easy way? Or would you like to do this the hard way? You see, at a time when the U.S. empire is all tangled up in the Middle East, what do you think the odds are that Russia and China might, shall we say, get froggy and say, you know what, when the cat's away, right, that when you are in your moment of weakness, we're going to try you. Everybody's going to try you at the same time. And now the Biden administration has put us in a position where they're in the Middle East, tangled up with Iran, and two gigantic world powers punch our cards. They call it, they punch our tickets. They call us out. They say, you know what? You've been saying you're going to protect Taiwan. You've been saying that you won't let Ukraine fall. And now you're tangled up in the Middle East. Perfect time for decision, isn't it? Perfect. What you're going to do. As they say, barbecue or mildew, right? So they have created such an environment. Now, the other thing is this. China could just say, you know, we ain't going to talk. We're going to let our fists do the talking, right? So here's what we're going to do. I mean, they could just simply say nothing. Yeah, I think we're going to do a blockade around Taiwan. Put a blockade around Taiwan, choke off the net, and knock out the bases in Taiwan immediately. Knock them out. Boom, 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 boom. Take Taiwan. What's the U.S. going to do? Hey, we're caught up in a fight over here. We got all this crap going on in Ukraine, and can we fight Taiwan? Oh, by the way, we're running out of missiles, bullets, artillery. We're running out of everything. We're running dry of stuff. We don't have the wherewithal to fight one war because we're running out of stuff. And now we're facing Russia and China saying, what you going to do? There ain't a lot of options, are there? Right? So the attempt, you know, as has been said, you try to defend everything, you can't defend anything. So the Biden administration has dug U.S. imperialism, the U.S. empire, into a hole that they can't possibly get out of. Because if they act here, they got a lot of people that are pissed at them. And then these other people can say, we're going to move. We're going to make our move. Now, what you going to do? Now, what are they going to do? Call Japan and Australia and Korea and say, sacrifice yourselves now. Now, quickly, sacrifice yourself. Meanwhile, the people at home are going to be like, hey, How come we can't get any oil? Why are the gas stations closed? And the ones that are open, it's $27 a gallon. And the ones that are closed, and they're saying we're almost out of oil. I'm sorry. You won't be able to get gas after Tuesday. And right now you can get in line. It's 5 miles long, and it'll probably be, the station will be empty by the time you get there. And if you get there, it'll cost $284 to fill your gas tank, which won't be a lot of good, because when you get to the grocery, the store, the shelves will be empty, and what's little there be $10 an egg if you want a dozen eggs, because all that stuff has to be brought in by trucks that use diesel fuel, right? In other words, the U.S. empire has taken itself up to a point where the options are to accept reality, accept the reality that you can't be the world hegemon, that other people have gotten too powerful, or run headlong into that and wipe out your economy, if not the world. So that's where we are. And it was inevitable. Someone said the Amish will be fine. Yeah, you know who will be fine? You go like out into these places in the world. I remember reading about this. I think it was in Pakistan or Afghanistan, right? And these mountainous people that were so far away from, they don't have like electronics and power, any of that stuff. They live so far out from things that like they didn't even know World War II happened. They were just like way out on another planet. World War II, what? They don't even have a concept of nations. You know what I mean? They're just like, this is where we are. This is our tribe. This is our people. This is how we live. Oh yeah. If you were going to go to the nearest city, by foot, it would take a year and a half. You know what I mean? So that ain't really an option, right? So they just live and do their things. Those kind of people that live on like islands in the middle of nowhere, the Eskimos that live up in the Arctic Circle, those kind of people will be fine. The rest of us, not so much. We'd probably be starving to death. So at any rate, that's where we are right now. We're waiting for the U.S. empire to make a decision, to decide what they're going to do. Certainly, they can accept it and say, we ain't going to push back. And they can do a token reaction. And I think that's what the Iranians may expect, some kind of a token reaction, some kind of something that appears like a punchback that isn't really a punchback, like they did last time when they like fired some drones or something into Iran. If you remember in April when Iran smacked them the first time, they fired some drones or something into Iran. And then they said, we hit Iran with massive retaliation. And Iran was like, that looks like a DJI drone. It looks like a little 4 quadcopter drone coming in. They like literally like threw a rock, bam, knocked it down with a rock. They didn't even, and 3 or 4 drones came in and fell. And then the U.S. and Israel said, we slammed them. Oh, we gave them sons of bitches what for this time? They'll never touch us again. So part of it can be the U.S. empire can decide we're going to do a token response and claim that it was a massive response. So that's an option. Okay, well, at any rate, you all.
Cool figure. Follow me.